Welcome to Harry's Cosmos. Today's adventure: what if Regulus Black raised Harry and Hermione as the twin heirs of House Black? If you haven't already, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Now, let's begin. Chapter 1: The Survivor. The Cave Drank Light. Regulus Black stood at the edge of the Black Lake and understood, in the part of him that had always done sums while other men prayed, that the Dark Lord had built this place to be witnessed by no one who would walk out of it. The island in the center glowed with a sick green radiance. The water did not move. It was not the stillness of calm, it was the stillness of a thing waiting to be disturbed. "Master should not," Creature whispered. The old elf's hands were knotted around the hem of Regulus's robes. Master came once before and Creature could not stop the bad water. Master should let Creature. "You will do exactly what I tell you," Regulus said. His voice did not shake. He had spent 3 weeks teaching it not to shake, alone in his bedroom at Grimmauld Place, rehearsing every word of this night until it had no fear left in it. "Nothing more, nothing less. Repeat it." Creature's eyes were huge and wet in the green light. "Creature makes Master drink. Creature takes the locket. Creature leaves the false one. Creature takes Master home the instant the basin is empty. Creature does not stop, no matter what Master says after the drinking. No matter what I say." Regulus crouched so that his face was level with the elf's. "You have heard me give you orders my whole life. Tonight you will hear me beg. You will hear me weep and command and threaten. You will ignore all of it. The man who drinks that potion is not your master. He is a thing the potion has made. Your master is the one giving you the order now, while his mind is his own." "Yes," Creature pressed the word out like something torn. "Yes, master." Regulus straightened and looked across the lake one last time. He had no illusions about what waited under that still water. He had come here once before, brought as a trusted hand to help the Dark Lord hide the thing, and he had watched his master feed the potion to a captured man and watched the dead rise when the screaming stopped, and he had stood there with his face arranged into devotion while every honest part of him understood that he was looking at the inside of the cause he had given his arm to. He had been planning this return ever since, 3 weeks of it. Every contingency written down and burned, held only in the cold accountant's room at the back of his head. He had worked the rest out the way he worked everything out, by treating the world as a lock and himself as the only key patient enough to turn it. The Dark Lord had hidden a piece of his soul in this cave. Regulus had learned that word from a book his own family was too proud to admit it owned. Horcrux, a vessel, an anchor that kept a man from dying when his body was destroyed. He had heard the Dark Lord boast, once drunk on his own theory of immortality, that he had gone further than any sorcerer in history, and Regulus, 19 and clever and beginning to be afraid, had counted the boast and turned it into a number. Further than any sorcerer, more than one. The locket was not the whole of it. The locket was a single brick in a wall Regulus could not see the ends of. He could not pull down the wall. He was one man, marked, hunted the moment his absence was noticed, but he could take a brick, he could prove the thing was mortal, he could leave a message inside its corpse for whoever came after, so that the next person to lift the locket from the basin would know what it was and how it had been beaten. That had been the plan 3 weeks ago. Tonight a second plan sat underneath it, quiet and unspoken, and the second plan was simpler and more selfish, and he had not let himself look at it directly until now. "I intend to live." He took the conjured goblet Creature handed him, and he drank. The first mouthful was cold and tasted of nothing, and then the cave folded inward and he was 11 years old and Sirius was leaving. Sirius was walking out the front door of Grimmauld Place with a trunk and a sneer and their mother's screams pouring after him, and Regulus stood at the top of the stairs and did not call out, because calling out was weakness and weakness was the one sin their house punished without mercy. "Coward," the potion told him in his mother's voice and his own. "You watched your brother leave and you said nothing because you wanted his room. You wanted to be the good son. You wanted to be loved by people who do not love anything. Make me drink," he said, and Creature lifted the goblet. The second mouthful was the war. It was the mark burning black into his forearm in a cellar that smelled of his own fear. It was kneeling. It was the laughter of men he had wanted to be and had become and now could not look at across a room. It was Bellatrix, his cousin, her head thrown back in delight while something screamed beyond the candlelight. "Wanted to belong," the potion crooned. "You wanted to matter to the great cause, and when you mattered you learned what the cause was and you have never been brave enough to say it out loud." "More," Regulus said, and his voice cracked, and Creature's face crumpled, and Creature made him drink. By the 6th mouthful he was begging. He heard himself doing it from somewhere far above, a cold remote attic of his own mind where the real Regulus had withdrawn to wait the way he had told himself he would. "Stop. No more 'I'm sorry, mother, I'm sorry, I'll be good, please, no more, I can't." The cave was full of water now, dark and rising, full of pale hands, and the thing wearing his face was on its knees clawing at the stone island, and Creature, small, ancient, weeping freely, tipped the 7th measure between his lips and the 8th and would not stop, because the man who had given the order had been the master and the thing screaming was not. The 9th emptied the basin. For one heartbeat the locket lay at the bottom of the shell, ordinary as a stone. Creature's hand closed over it. The false locket, Regulus's own, with its folded note inside to the Dark Lord. I have stolen the real Horcrux and intend to destroy it, clicked into the basin in its place, and the lake came alive. The water did not splash, it rose. Pale hands found the edge of the island, then arms, then faces with drowned eyes, and the green light turned them into a single rising tide of the dead. Regulus, hollowed out and burning with thirst, lunged for the water like a man who had crossed a desert, and Creature caught a fistful of his sleeve and the cave was gone. They landed in the cave by the sea, the entrance cave, where the smell of salt was so clean and ordinary that Regulus sobbed once into the wet sand before he could stop himself. He was on fire from the inside. The thirst was a living thing trying to crawl out through his teeth. He scrabbled toward the sound of the surf, and Creature grabbed him again, and they appeared in the kitchen of Grimmauld Place, and Creature upended the water jug into Regulus's open mouth, and he drank until he choked and drank more. When the thirst finally let go of him, he lay on the cold flagstones with his cheek against the floor he had been born above, and he looked at the locket where it lay in Creature's outstretched hands, and he began methodically to plan the rest of his life. It took him 4 days to destroy it. He had known it would not be simple. The locket sat on the table in the basement workroom, and it watched him. He could feel it watching, a pressure behind the eyes, a low constant suggestion that he was tired, that he should sleep, that there was no rush, that his mother would be so disappointed, that Sirius had always been the strong one, and Regulus had always been the careful one who measured before he leapt, and measured himself into a corner. He learned to work with the thing whispering. He learned to do sums while it told him he was nothing. He had ruled out fire first. The Dark Lord's most prized possession would not be left vulnerable to a hearth. He had ruled out ordinary curses. The locket turned them. What it could not turn in the end was the thing the Black family had kept locked in the deepest vault under the house since before Regulus's grandfather was born, a short curved blade, its black metal sweating venom that never dried, taken from the corpse of a serpent that no living wizard had a name for. Basilisk kind, older than the breed in the school's stories. The family had used it to settle the kind of disputes that did not appear in any ledger, and it had been sealed away when the ministry grew teeth, and it lay now in Regulus's hand, and it was the only thing in the house older and crueler than the locket. He opened the locket with a word of Parseltongue he had bought from a dying man, and the thing inside it did not stay a locket. It poured upward into smoke, and the smoke became a room. Regulus stood in a memory that was not his, a great hall, a long table, and at the head of it Sirius, but a Sirius grown into the lord their mother had wanted, cold and golden and contemptuous, who looked at Regulus the way one looks at a stain. "You were always going to fail us," the smoke Sirius said in their mother's words. Beside him sat their parents, restored, beautiful, turning their faces away. And then the figures multiplied. A woman with red hair he had never met, holding a child, looking at Regulus with such loathing that he understood the smoke had reached past his own dead and found a dead he had helped to make. "You took the mark," she said. "Men like you came to my door. You are why there are houses with no children left in them." "Yes," Regulus said to the smoke and lifted the blade. "I know exactly what I am. That is why I am the one standing here." He drove the venomed edge into the heart of the open locket. The cave had drunk light. The locket screamed it back out. A column of black radiance tore upward through the ceiling of the workroom and did not break anything, which was somehow worse. The room held perfectly still while the soul inside the metal came apart. Cold went through Regulus's chest like a spear. It struck below the collarbone and spread, a frost that did not melt, and he heard himself make a sound he had never made before. When the light died, the locket lay split and silent and merely old, and Regulus lay on the floor with both hands pressed to his sternum, and under his fingers the skin had gone white and hard and cold as a coin left out in winter. The mark of it would never warm again. He would carry the touch of the thing's death on him for the rest of his life, a patch of flesh that belonged to the lake, he thought, with the part of him that did sums, one. And then, because he was honest with himself if with no one else, and I am already half killed by one. There are more, and I cannot do this 5 times, and I will not live to see it done. So the question is not how I win the war. The question is what I build that survives me. Creature found him an hour later and put him to bed, and for the first time since the cave the elf did not weep, because his master was alive and the bad thing was dead, and to Creature the two facts together were the whole of justice in the world. He slept for a day and woke knowing exactly who he was, which was new. He had spent 19 years being a person assembled out of other people's expectations, his mother's good son, the Dark Lord's promising recruit, the brother who stayed. The cave had stripped all of that off him, and the locket had burned the last of it away, and what was left, lying in the cold bed in the cold house with a coin of dead skin over his heart, was a man who had drunk poison to the bottom of the goblet and walked out alive on his own arithmetic. He could work with that man. He had never been able to work with the other ones. He got up and went down to the workroom and made himself look at the split locket in the daylight. It was nothing now, old gold, a cracked green stone, hinges that would never close. He had expected to feel triumph and felt instead the flat satisfaction of a sum that balanced. The thing had told him he was a coward and he had killed it. That did not make him brave. It made him correct, which he had always found more reliable than courage. Brave men in this war died in ditches with their wands out and their causes intact and changed nothing. Correct men lived in dead houses and took bricks out of walls. He thought about Bellatrix because the locket had shown her to him and the showing still itched. His cousin had loved the cause the way a fire loves a dry field, not for what it built but for what it let her burn. He had watched her at the revels, head back, delighted, and he had told himself for years that he was nothing like her, that he served for the principle and she served for the pleasure. The cave had ended that lie too. There was no principle. He had looked finally at the actual work of the mark, the houses with no children left in them, the word the locket had borrowed from Lily Potter's mouth, and he had understood that the principle was a costume the pleasure wore, and that he had bled to belong to people who would have killed him the moment he stopped being useful, and that Bellatrix at least had the honesty to enjoy what she was. He did not hate her for it anymore. He simply intended to outlive everything she loved. Creature. The elf appeared at his elbow before the word was finished. We're going to leave this house soon and we're not coming back to it as ourselves. I'm going to die, officially on paper. You understand what that means? Creature's eyes went round. Master cannot die, master only just, on paper, story. The story is that something killed me. The story has to be good enough that no one looks for the man underneath it. He crouched to the elf's level because some things you do not say standing over a person. I am asking you to help me lie to the whole world, to my mother, to the family. The tapestry will say I'm dead and my mother will believe it and grieve, and you will let her, and you will never tell her otherwise, and that is the hardest order I have ever given you, and I am sorry for it. For a moment the old elf trembled with the weight of it. The Black family's whole creed bound him to that house and that mistress, and Regulus was asking him to deceive her unto her grave. Then Creature's knotted hands closed on the front of Regulus's robes, the same grip he had used in the cave, and his cracked voice came out fierce. Master came back from the bad water. The mistress would lose Master twice if Creature told the truth, once to the lie and once to the men who would come for the truth. Creature will keep the lie, Creature keeps Master, that is what Creature is for. Yes, Regulus said, and found he had to look at the dead locket for a moment before he could go on. That is what you're for, and I'm going to make it worth something, not just my hiding. The whole house, Creature, everything we are, I'm going to make it mean what it should have meant before they ruined it. It was the first time he said the thing out loud that would shape the rest of his life, and he said it to a house elf in a workroom that smelled of venom and burnt gold, and the elf nodded as though it were the most natural promise in the world, and that more than the cave, more than the locket, was the moment Regulus Black stopped being a casualty of the war and became something the war had not accounted for. Faking his death was, by comparison, an exercise in tidiness. Regulus understood the men he had served better than they would ever have credited. They were not curious about their own dead. A Death Eater who vanished had either fled, in which case he was hunted as a traitor and his absence explained, or fallen in some operation no one would claim. Regulus had let it be known in the careful weeks before the cave that he had grown squeamish, that he had been asking questions, that the Dark Lord's confidence in him had cooled. He had made himself, in the eyes of the mark, a problem about to be solved. So when Regulus Black simply stopped existing, the only mystery was who had done it, and every man in that brotherhood assumed it had been one of the others, on the Dark Lord's quiet order, and no one asked because asking implied you had not been trusted with the knowing. He left enough behind to satisfy the family. Blood his own, drawn and spread on the floor of a room in a house outside Bristol that the Black family had owned and forgotten. Robes. A wand snapped, not his real wand but a serviceable copy he had been carrying for a year against exactly this need. He arranged it as the aftermath of something violent and unsurvivable, and he did it well enough that when the ministry's people eventually came, they wrote presumed dead in the ledger and moved on, because in the autumn of 1979 there were too many genuinely dead to spend long on a presumed one. The hardest part was the tapestry. He went up to the drawing room at Grimmauld Place in the dead of night, the night before he left it forever, and he stood in front of the great web of names that recorded every Black who had ever been born into the favor of the house. His own face looked back at him from its disc of gold thread, Regulus Arcturus Black, the dates of his birth, and he watched it happen the date of his death, stitching itself into the wool by magic older than the ministry, older than England. The house believed him dead. The house was rarely wrong, and he had spent his cleverness making sure it would be wrong this once. Sirius's face was already gone, burned to a black scorch by their mother's fury when he ran. Now Regulus's joined it, not burned but ended, a closed parenthesis. 2 sons. The house had 2 sons, and the tapestry now said it had none worth counting. Sirius cast out, Regulus dead. Walburga Black had screamed at one boy for leaving and would, before long, scream herself into the grave over the other for dying, and she would die believing both her children lost, and Regulus stood in front of the wool and made himself look at the cost of the thing he was choosing. Tauger's Pur, he said to the names, the family creed, always pure. It was stitched in gold at the head of the whole tapestry, the oldest words in the room. He had hated those words his entire life and feared them and bled for them, and they had bought him a mark and a cave and a hole in his chest that would never warm. He looked at them now and he did not feel hatred. He felt the particular contempt of a man who has finally read a contract closely and found that it does not say what everyone insisted it said. Pure. The family had spent 3 centuries deciding it meant blood. Regulus, who had watched purebloods kneel to a half-blood lord and call it purity, who had watched men with the cleanest names in Britain do the filthiest things on earth and tell themselves it was breeding, Regulus knew the family had simply read the word wrong. Pure was not a fact about ancestry. Pure was a quality of loyalty, faithful, undivided, always faithful. That was the creed the house should have kept, and the house had betrayed it so thoroughly that there was no one left to keep it but a dead man. Always faithful, he told the tapestry. I'll teach it to someone who deserves it. I don't yet know who, but the house isn't finished. I'm not going to let you be finished. It was, he would think later, the most absurd promise a hunted man ever made to a wall of wool in an empty house. He kept it anyway. Keeping it was the only thing that kept him. He went to ground in the hollow. It was the smallest and least important of the Black properties, a low stone house folded into a wrinkle of the Welsh marches where the hills came down to stream, and a wood the family had warded against trespass so thoroughly that the muggles who farmed the valley had forgotten there was a house there at all. No Death Eater knew of it. No ministry map recorded it. It had a workroom, a library that smelled of damp and centuries, a kitchen creature took to with the fierce joy of an old servant given a small kingdom, and walls thick enough to muffle a man learning to live as no one. For 2 years Regulus did 3 things. He read, hunting through the family's worst books for everything they had ever set down about Horcruxes, soul magic, the architecture of immortality. He healed as much as the cold place in his chest would let him. And he watched the war from the inside of his own death, the safest seat in Britain. He learned the shape of it slowly, through the prophet and through the gossip creature brought home from the house elf networks that ran under wizarding society like roots under a floor. He learned that the Dark Lord was winning. He learned the names of the dead as they fell, the Bones family, the Pruett brothers, the McKinnons, and he did the sums on each one and they all came to the same total. The war could not be won by killing the Dark Lord's body, because the Dark Lord no longer kept his life in his body. The Order of the Phoenix, whoever they were fighting a man who had taken his own death off the table, and they did not know it, and Regulus could not tell them without surfacing, and surfacing meant dying for real. So he sat in his dead man's house, and he was, for 2 years, the only person alive who understood the war and the only person alive who could do nothing about it. He did not waste the 2 years. A man who cannot act can still prepare to act, and Regulus prepared the way a spider prepares a web, patiently in threads against the day a thing finally blunders into it. He drew up a map of the enemy he could not name aloud, and on the map he marked everything he knew or could deduce about where the rest of the Dark Lord's soul might lie. He knew the man, that was the whole of his advantage, and he wrung it dry. Tom Riddle had been a collector of trophies and a worshipper of history, and he would not have hidden the pieces of himself in cheap places. He would have wanted them grand. He would have wanted them to mean something, relics of the great founders, objects with names, things a lesser wizard would never dare touch. The locket had been Slytherin's, and the locket had been in a cave dressed up like a tomb. Regulus reasoned outward from that single proven fact the way a mathematician reasons from one true equation, and the reasoning gave him a shape if not a list. There would be others, and they would be old, and they would be guarded by the kind of cleverness that mistook itself for genius. One thread of the web tightened on its own. Creature came home one evening from the elf networks with a thing he did not understand, and Regulus did. There was talk, Creature said, among the Malfoy elves, of the master being entrusted with a treasure by the Dark Lord himself before the fall, a book, an old plain diary, kept hidden and spoken of as though it were a person. Lucius had been proud of it. Lucius had been the sort of man who could not hold a secret without letting its weight show in how he stood. A diary. Regulus set down his cup and looked at the dark window for a long time, a book that was spoken of as a person. An object the Dark Lord had handed to a follower and called precious, in the years before he went to Godric's Hollow believing himself beyond death. It fit the shape on the map exactly, and it told Regulus something colder than the fit itself. The Dark Lord had not hidden all the pieces of his soul in caves and tombs. He had handed at least one to a man casually as a test of loyalty, as though immortality were a thing you could lend out to impress your friends. The arrogance of it was staggering, and the arrogance was the lesson. A man that arrogant had made more of these than caution would ever have allowed. The number in Regulus's head, which had begun at more than 1, climbed and would not come back down. He did not move on the diary. He could not. To take it would be to surface, and Lucius Malfoy's house was warded by a man with money and fear in equal measure, and a dead black who broke in to steal a book would not stay dead for long. He marked the thread on the map and left it taut, and he understood that this was the true shape of his life now, knowing where the enemy's heart was buried in pieces all over Britain, and not being able to lift a single shovel without dying for it. That was the worst of the 2 years, not the danger, which he had made his peace with in the cave, but the helplessness. He had always been a person who solved things. He had solved his way out of the family's expectations and into the mark, and then solved his way out of the mark and into the lake, and each solution had cost more than the last, and he had paid, because paying was the only proof that he was more than a clever coward. Now he had the largest problem of his life laid out in front of him in full, and the solution to it was wait, and waiting was the one thing his cleverness had never been any good at. Creature kept him from going mad with it. The old elf cooked as though feeding a starving regiment, polished a house no one would ever visit until the dark wood glowed, and told him stories of the blacks at night, the great ones and the terrible ones, Phineas Nigellus and Cygnus, and the aunt who had married a Bulgarian and never been forgiven, names Regulus had grown up hearing as warnings and now heard, for the first time, as a kind of company. The house was full of the dead, and the dead were, it turned out, the only family a dead man was permitted to keep. Some nights Regulus sat in the cold library and let Creature's cracked voice run on about people 3 centuries gone, and felt the particular loneliness of a man who had cut himself off from everyone living, and could not, for the life of him, regret it, because every living person he had loved had wanted him to be something he had finally refused to be. The cold place on his chest taught him things in those 2 years that no book could. It did not heal. He had hoped at first that it would, that the deadness the locket had left would fade the way an ordinary wound fades, that warmth would creep back into the coin of dead skin over his heart. It never did. What it did instead was teach him, with the patient cruelty of a thing that cannot be argued with, exactly what a Horcrux was, because he carried a small piece of one's death inside him now, and he could feel, on the bad nights, the shape of the thing he had killed. The fragment had not gone quietly. Some echo of it had marked him the way a struck bell marks the air, and lying awake in the cold house Regulus learned to read that echo, to understand the architecture of a torn soul from the inside, from the scar a torn soul leaves on the man who unmakes it. It was knowledge no scholar of soul magic had ever possessed, because no scholar of soul magic had ever survived destroying one of these things at close range. Regulus had. The price of the knowing was the cold, and he paid it every night, and he came to think of it as tuition. He tested himself against the family's worst books with the cold as his instrument. When a text claimed a thing about soul anchoring, he held the claim up against the echo in his chest and felt whether it was true. Most of the books were wrong. The family had collected darkness the way it collected everything, for prestige rather than understanding, and half its grimoires were the boasting of men who had read about horrors rather than worked them. But here and there a line rang true against the cold, and those lines Regulus copied out and kept, and slowly over 2 years of sleepless nights he assembled the beginning of a thing no one had ever assembled. A true account of how a soul could be torn and hidden, and this was the part that mattered, the part he returned to again and again with the cold aching under his fingers, how it might be drawn back out of a vessel without destroying the vessel itself. He could not yet do it, he knew that. The cold told him how far he had to go and how little he understood, and on the worst nights it whispered in something close to the locket's old voice that he would die long before he learned enough, that the work was bigger than one hidden man's lifetime, that he was a coward hiding in Wales pretending a dead family's library made him useful. He had learned in the cave not to argue with that voice. He simply outlasted it night after night the way he had outlasted the potion, by withdrawing to the cold remote attic at the back of his mind and waiting for the dark to be over. Master should sleep, Creature would say, finding him at the desk at 3 in the morning with the cold scar bared and a grimoire open, and his face gray with the effort of feeling his way through a torn soul's geometry. Master cannot save the world if Master is dead of not sleeping. I'm not trying to save the world, Creature. It was true he had given up on the world in the cave. I'm trying to be ready, for what I don't know yet, but the only thing worse than carrying knowledge no one else has is wasting it because I was tired. He would close the book then because Creature asked, and because the old elf was the only living thing that still treated him as worth keeping alive. There's a use coming for all of this. I can feel it the way I feel the cold. I just have to live long enough to find out what it is. Then on the morning of the 2nd of November, 1981, Creature came into the library with the prophet held in both hands like something hot, and Regulus read the headline 3 times before it stopped rearranging itself into something it could not possibly say. A chi who must not be named vanquished. He read the whole of it standing up. James and Lily Potter dead at Godric's Hollow. The Dark Lord come to their house in the night and broken there, his body destroyed, gone, finished. And the child, 15 months old, alive, the only survivor, a scar on his forehead and the whole of the wizarding world already saying his name like a charm. The boy who lived. Regulus sat down. He knew James Potter the way you know the boy 3 years above you whose every triumph the school recited until you wanted to be sick of him and could not quite manage it, the careless brilliance, the easy friends, the talent that never seemed to cost him anything. He had been Sirius's friend, which had made him an enemy by the simple geometry of the house. Regulus had spent his school years not envying James Potter with a discipline that was itself a kind of envy. And the red-haired woman in the locket's smoke, the one who had looked at him with such loathing and named him for what he was, he understood now whose face the locket had borrowed. He had never met Lily Potter. The Horcrux had reached into the country's freshest grief and found her for him 3 years before she died, and shown her to him so that he would know exactly what kind of man stood in that workroom holding the venomed blade. That was a thing to sit with later. The thing to sit with now was the arithmetic, and the arithmetic was wrong. The Dark Lord could not have been vanquished, not destroyed, not finished, not the way the headline meant it. His body could be destroyed. Regulus had no doubt at all that whatever happened in that house at Godric's Hollow had ended Tom Riddle's body. But the man had anchored himself against precisely that. Somewhere in Britain, a piece of his soul still sat in some hidden vessel, patient, waiting, exactly as the locket had waited at the bottom of the lake. The Dark Lord was not dead, he was misplaced. And the entire country was about to spend the next decade celebrating a victory that had not occurred, lowering its guard against an enemy who had merely stepped out of the room. And the child had survived the killing curse. Regulus turned that over for a long time. He knew the curse. He knew it did not leave survivors and did not leave scars because it did not leave anything. It was a door with nothing on the other side. A child did not walk away from it with a mark on his forehead. Unless the curse had struck something it could not simply unmake. Unless, in the breaking of the Dark Lord's body, in the wild tearing loose of a soul already torn so many times it could barely hold its shape, something had come off and gone looking for the nearest living thing and lodged there. He pressed 2 fingers to the cold patch under his collarbone where the locket had marked him, and he thought about anchors, and he thought about a 15-month-old child with a scar shaped like the edge of a curse, and the conclusion arrived fully formed, and he did not like it at all. "Creature," he said, "what do you hear of the boy, the Potter child? Where have they sent him?" Creature's ears flattened. The elf networks ran everywhere, and what one elf heard in the end most elves heard. The old fool sent him to the mother's sister, the muggle one, the one with the long neck in the small mean house. Creature heard the black elves laughing about it. A Potter master, the last Potter left on a doorstep like a milk bottle, with muggles who hate the very smell of magic. Dumbledore did this. The headmaster, yes, Creature heard he set wards on the house, blood wards, and then he went away and left the baby crying on the step in the cold. Regulus stood at the window of his dead man's library and looked out at the wood and did the last of the night's sums. Albus Dumbledore had taken the most important child in Britain, a child who, if Regulus was right, was carrying a piece of the Dark Lord's soul in his skull, and locked him inside blood wards in a muggle house, away from the magical world, away from anyone who might recognize what he was or train him to be more than a victim waiting for the day the curse came back to collect what was lodged in him. Dumbledore was either a fool, which Regulus did not believe, or he was a man playing a very long game in which a child was a piece to be kept on the board unused until the moment came to spend him. Regulus knew that game. His family had invented several of its variations. He recognized the move, and he recognized, with the particular clarity of a man who has decided he is already dead, that he was the only person alive who knew enough to refuse to let it be played. There was a child on a doorstep with the enemy's soul in his head and no one to teach him what he was. And there was a dead man in a hidden house with the family creed unkept, a hole in his chest where he had killed one of those soul fragments with his own hands, and a promise made to a wall of names that the house was not finished. He had told the tapestry he would teach always faithful to someone who deserved it, and that he did not yet know who. He thought now that he was beginning to. "We're going to Surrey," he said. "I want to see him before I decide anything. I decide nothing until I've seen him." It was a lie, and Creature knew it was a lie, and neither of them said so. Regulus had already decided. He had decided in the instant he understood what the boy was carrying. He simply needed to see the child's face before he let himself admit that the rest of his life had just rearranged itself around a stranger's son. He went up to the drawing room one more time before they left, in the gray hour before dawn, and he stood in front of the tapestry and the gold words at its head. Tauger's purr. Behind him the house creaked, settling, full of dead air and his mother's portrait sleeping in its frame. Somewhere far to the south a child he had never met was waking up cold on a doorstep, or being carried inside by a woman who would never love him, in a world that thought its war was won. "All right," Regulus said quietly to the names of his dead family. "Not finished. I heard you. Let's begin." He pulled his hood up and he took Creature's hand, and the dead man went out into the living world to steal the future back from everyone who thought they already owned it. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2, Two Children Number 4, Privet Drive, was the kind of house built to convince its owners that nothing strange had ever happened anywhere. Regulus stood across the road in the dark beneath a street lamp that did not light him, watching the square windows and the square hedge and the square little car in the drive, and he understood the Dursleys before he had seen a single one of their faces. He had grown up among people who used Granger to hide their cruelty. These ones used ordinariness, which was somehow worse, because Granger at least admitted it wanted to be feared. The smell of cut grass came off the lawn in the cold. He stayed there an hour, counting lights going off, and he let the contempt settle into something useful before he crossed the road. He had not come to take the boy. That was the lie he had told Creature and himself, and the lie lasted exactly as long as it took him to reach the front step and feel the wards. They rose around the house like the walls of a well, and they were good work, old blood magic, the kind the Ministry had outlawed and Dumbledore had clearly performed anyway, keyed to the shared blood of two sisters. Lily Potter's sacrifice was the foundation stone, her sister's living blood was the wall. While the boy could call this house home, while a woman who shared his mother's blood lived under this roof, no servant of the Dark Lord could reach him here. It was, Regulus admitted, an elegant piece of protection. He stood in the dark and admired it, and then he did what he always did with elegant things, which was take them apart in his head to see what they could not do. They could not protect the boy from the people inside the house. That was the first flaw, and it was not a flaw of craft. It was a flaw of judgment, the judgment of a man who believed that blood meant love. Regulus had spent his life among blood that meant nothing of the kind. The wards would keep every Death Eater in Britain off the lawn and would do precisely nothing about a woman who looked at her sister's orphan and saw a cuckoo in her nest. The second flaw was the one that decided him. The wards held the boy here. They were anchored to this house, this blood, this address. As long as the protection mattered, as long as the war was unfinished and the Dark Lord misplaced rather than dead, the boy could not leave. He would grow up inside a well, fed enough to live and loved not at all, magically inert because no one would teach him, named Potter by a world that had turned his name into a coin and would spend him when the time came. Dumbledore had not hidden a child, he had shelved one. He had put the most dangerous boy in Britain in a cupboard and walked away to wait for the day he would need to take him down again. Regulus pressed 2 fingers to the cold patch under his collarbone, where a different kind of anchor had marked him, and he thought, no, he could not break the wards. Breaking them would scream his presence to Dumbledore and to anyone the headmaster had watching, and a torn blood ward left a wound in the air that took weeks to close. But Regulus had not built his survival on breaking things. He had built it on the fact that he understood the family magic better than the men who had inherited it, and the family magic had a doctrine about blood that Albus Dumbledore, for all his brilliance, had never been raised inside and so had never thought to check. The wards were keyed to the blood of Lily Evans and her sister, but blood is not a wall with one gate. Blood is a web of names, and the Potters were not strangers to the web Regulus had been born into. He knew the tapestry. He had stood in front of it 3 nights running, memorizing the edges of it, the marriages out that the family recorded even when it disowned them. Doria Black had married Charles Potter 2 generations back, a true daughter of the house, her name still stitched in gold because the family had approved the match. The boy asleep in that house carried Potter blood and Evans blood, and threaded through the Potter line the blood of House Black. It was thin, it was old. It was, by the strict reckoning of the family rights, entirely sufficient. A blood ward keyed to the mother's line could not refuse the cousin's line, because to the deep old magic that underlay it, they were the same substance asked to recognize itself. Regulus did not need to break the well. He needed only to convince it that he, too, was family come to carry a child of the blood home. He knelt on the cold step and he opened the small ebony case he had brought, and he began the rite the family had used for 900 years to claim its own. It was not loud. The deepest magic never was. He drew the venom blade, the same blade that had killed the locket, because what better instrument to claim an heir than the one that had unmade the enemy's soul, and he opened a line across his own palm, and he let 3 drops fall onto the threshold stone, and he spoke the names. Not incantation, lineage. He named himself Regulus Arcturus, son of Orion, son of Arcturus, back and back through the gold-threaded dead, and then he named the boy Harry James, son of Charles and Doria of the House of Black. He laid claim in the oldest grammar there was, the grammar of mine, and the threshold stone drank his blood and considered it. The night went very still. Even the cut grass smell seemed to thin out. And then the ward answered, not with violence, with recognition, a deep slow tolling that he felt in his teeth and his marked chest and the soles of his feet, the sound a great house makes when it opens a door it has kept locked. Black, the magic said, in the wordless way such things speak. Black has come for one of its own. The blood wall did not fall. It simply parted the way a family parts to let a cousin through, and Regulus Black walked into Albus Dumbledore's fortress because the fortress could not tell the difference between the headmaster's blood and his own. He went up the stairs without a sound. The cupboard under them he noted and would think about later with the part of him that kept accounts. The boy was in the smallest bedroom, in a cot too small for him, in a house that had already decided he was an inconvenience. Regulus stood over him and looked down at the most important child in Britain, and the child looked back. He was awake. Of course he was awake. Children who learn early that crying brings nothing learn instead to lie still and watch. He had black hair, untidy even in sleep's wake, and green eyes that Regulus recognized from a Locket's cruel theater, and a thin red scar on his forehead shaped exactly like the edge of a curse that should have killed him. He did not cry. He looked up at the hooded stranger with the steady, unblinking attention of a child taking the measure of the world, and Regulus, who had walked into the house intending to look and decide, understood that the decision had been made the moment the boy declined to be afraid of him. "Hello, Harry," he said very quietly. "I knew your grandmother's name. That makes us family after a fashion, and family doesn't leave family in a cupboard." The scar, he would learn over the years to come, was warm to the touch and should not have been, the same way his own chest was cold and should not have been. Two marks left by the same torn soul, one on a man who had killed a piece of it, and one on the child it had tried to use as a door. He laid his uninjured hand over the boy's forehead, and the scar pulsed once against his palm like a second heartbeat, and Regulus felt the thing inside it stir, old and patient and aware, lodged in a child's skull, waiting. He did not flinch. He had held worse in his hands and walked out alive. "We'll deal with that," he murmured. "Not tonight, but we will." He lifted the boy from the cot. Harry came without protest, one fist closing in the front of Regulus's robes with a grip that was, the man thought, with something he did not have a name for, almost exactly creatures. He left the way he had come, through a wall that recognized him as kin, and he left the wards intact behind him because that was the cruelest and cleverest thing he could do. The protection would stand, the house would feel whole, and it would be days before anyone thought to check whether the thing it protected was still inside it. In Scotland, an old man sleeping in a tower came awake between one breath and the next. Albus Dumbledore lay still in the dark and let the alarm finish singing through the instruments on the spindle-legged tables of his office 2 floors below, and he sorted the note of it the way a musician sorts a wrong chord, not a breach. The wards at Privet Drive had not been broken. He would have felt a break the way one feels a bone snap. This was subtler and more troubling for being subtle. The wards had opened. They had recognized a claimant and let him pass, which meant the claimant had carried blood the wards counted as Lily's own. That should not have been possible. Petronella and her boy were the only living branch of that blood he had been able to find. He had checked. He had spent a careful evening with the Evans genealogy and the Potter genealogy both, and there had been no one the Potter genealogy. Dumbledore sat up, and in the dark his face did something that none of his order would have recognized, because he kept it for the moments when he had been outplayed by his own thoroughness. The Potters had married into the old families for centuries. He had looked at the Evans side, the Muggle side, the side that held the sacrifice, and he had not thought to walk the Potter line back far enough to find the place where it touched a house everyone believed extinct in all the ways that mattered. A black daughter 2 generations gone. He could see it now, clear as a struck match. The boy carried black blood, thin and legitimate, and someone who also carried it had walked through the strongest protection Albus Dumbledore had ever raised, as though it were a garden gate. Someone of House Black. The house was a graveyard. Orion dead, Walburga dying, Regulus dead in 79, the daughters scattered into other names, Malfoy, Lestrange, the disowned Tonks line. Bellatrix was in no state to plan anything subtle and was, in any case, about to be in Azkaban if the Aurors did their work, which left Sirius Black, who had been the Potters' secret keeper, who had betrayed them to their deaths, who had blown apart a street full of Muggles and was now, by every account, laughing in a cell on a rock in the North Sea. Sirius could not have done this. Sirius was caged. Unless Sirius were not the man Dumbledore had believed, which was a door the old man opened a careful inch and then, lacking proof, closed again. A rogue of the blood then, someone the family records had missed, someone who had taken the Potter boy out of the safest place in Britain for reasons Dumbledore could not yet read. He did not raise the alarm. That was the thing his order would never have understood, and the thing that made him formidable. A lesser man would have flooded Surrey with Aurors and learned nothing. Dumbledore lay back down in the dark and began, instead, to think, to lay the lost piece against the board and wait to see where it would have to surface. The boy was the linchpin of a prophecy only 2 men living had heard in full. Whoever had taken him would, sooner or later, have to do something with him. Heirs of dead houses did not steal the boy who lived to keep him in a cupboard. They stole him to make him into something. "All right," Albus said softly to the dark, almost the same words a younger man had spoken to a wall of names 100 miles south, though neither would ever know it. "Let us see what you intend to build." He would watch the lineage records. He would watch the old seats. He would wait because he had waited longer for less, and because a boy who vanished could always be found again by the shape of the hole he left. It was, all things considered, a very good night's sleep that Albus Dumbledore did not get. Harry did not sleep that first night at the Hollow, and neither did Regulus, and Creature did not so much as sit down. The elf had taken one look at the child in his master's arms, and undergone a transformation Regulus had not witnessed in 20 years of knowing him. The grief and the half-madness peeled back, and underneath was the thing house elves were before the cruelty of their masters bent them, a creature built around the care of the young of a house. Creature conjured a cot from somewhere, warmed milk, produced from the depths of the kitchen a small wooden snake that had been Regulus's own and that Regulus had entirely forgotten, and he hovered and fussed and crooned in a cracked voice until the boy, who had watched the strange hooded man with such steadiness, finally consented to be a child and fell asleep with the wooden snake clutched to his chest. He has the eyes of the Evans woman, Creature whispered, scandalized and delighted in equal measure. And the hair of his father and the blood of the house, master, the blood of the house. Creature can feel it. The boy is ours. He's ours now, Regulus agreed and surprised himself with how completely he meant it. He had taken the boy to keep him out of Dumbledore's game and to keep the thing in his scar where Regulus could watch it. Those were the reasons he had walked into Surrey with, and they were good reasons, and they were not the reason he sat in the dark beside a sleeping child until dawn. The reason for that was older and stupider and had to do with a man who had spent his whole life being family to people who used the word as a leash, and who had just discovered, at nearly 22, that it could mean the opposite. The boy had taken his robes in one fist and declined to be afraid. No one had ever declined to be afraid of Regulus Black and meant it kindly. He found he could not put the child down. In the morning he made the thing legal, which was to say he made it real in the only court that had ever mattered to him. He did not go to the ministry. The ministry believed him dead, and he intended to keep it grateful for the belief. He went to the right. In the cold ritual room beneath the hollow, by the light of candles that the family magic kept from guttering, Regulus performed the first half of an heir claiming, the recognition, the part that bound a child of the blood to the protection and the obligations of the house without yet making him heir. He spoke the boy's lineage into the old grammar again, Harry James of the line of Doria, and he added to it the part that was his alone to give, taken into the keeping of Regulus Arcturus, who holds the duty of the house while the house sleeps. The candles brightened. Somewhere far to the north, in a drawing room in London, a thread of gold in a tapestry warmed and did not yet know why. The boy, sitting on the cold floor in a too large jumper, watched the candles and laughed, a sound Regulus had not heard inside those walls in 2 years, and the man knelt down in the candlelight and let himself, for one unaccountable moment, laugh with him. Towger's purr, he told the boy, who could not understand him and would, in time, understand him better than anyone living. Always faithful, that's what it means, whatever they told you it means. You and I are going to put it back. The first year with Harry remade Regulus in ways he did not notice until they were already done. He had taken the boy as a strategist takes a piece off an opponent's board, and for about a fortnight he managed to keep treating him that way, a charge, a responsibility, a problem of feeding and warding and concealment. Then the boy learned to say his name. Not Regulus, which was beyond a year-and-a-half-old tongue, but a sound Harry made when Regulus came into a room, a rising delighted syllable that meant you, the one I was waiting for, and the first time the boy made it Regulus stood in the doorway of the Hollow's kitchen with a stack of warded books in his arms, and discovered that the cold place on his chest had, for one impossible instant, gone warm. After that he stopped pretending. He learned the boy the way he learned everything, by close attention, and what he learned undid a number of things he had believed about himself. He had thought himself a cold man, the cave had made him one, or revealed the one he'd always been. But a cold man does not sit on a kitchen floor at midnight teaching a toddler that the shadows on the wall are only creatures cooking pots and nothing to fear. A cold man does not invent, on the spot, an entire mythology of friendly constellations to settle a child who has woken screaming from a dream he is too young to describe. A cold man does not feel his own breath stop when a small body goes briefly limp with a fever, or sit up 3 nights running with a basin and a cooling charm and a terror he had not felt since the lake. Regulus did all of those things in the first year, and somewhere in the doing of them, the dead man he had built in the cave acquired, against his will and entirely without his permission, a heart he'd thought he'd left at the bottom of the basin. Creature was insufferable about it. The old elf had loved the boy on sight and watched his master's slow thaw with the smug satisfaction of a creature who had known all along how it would end. Master pretends he raises the boy for the war, Creature observed, scrubbing a pot that was already clean, watching Regulus rock a feverish toddler by the fire at 4 in the morning. Master pretends many things. Creature has served the House of Black for 200 years. Creature knows the difference between a man doing his duty and a man who has found something he would die for. Master should stop pretending. It is bad for the digestion. I raise him because the world wanted him as a weapon or a corpse, Regulus said, which was true, and because someone has to teach him what he is before someone else teaches him what they want him to be, which was also true, and because he stopped. The boy had fallen asleep against his chest, one fist closed in his robes over the cold mark, and the cold mark was warm again, the way it only ever was now when the boy was near. And because I find I can't put him down, Regulus finished quietly to the fire, and Creature had the grace not to say Creature told Master so, though every line of the old elf's body said it for him. But a year in, watching the boy thrive, Regulus began to feel the edge of a fear he had not anticipated, and it was the fear that drove him in the end toward the second child before he ever felt the burst of magic by the river. He had built his whole survival on the principle of redundancy, never one plan, always a second underneath it, never one route out, always a third. And he realized one night, staked everything that now mattered to him on a single small life. One boy, one fever away, one accident away, one clever enemy away from a loss that would unmake him as thoroughly as the lake nearly had. He had made himself, the cold accountant in him noted with something like horror, a single point of failure, and he had done it by loving exactly one irreplaceable thing. The house needed more than one heir. That was the strategic truth, and he turned it over for weeks, and he knew even as he turned it that the strategy was a costume worn by a simpler need, that a man who has found one thing worth living for begins, almost at once, to want the world to hold more than one, so that the loss of the one is not the loss of everything. He did not go looking for a second child. He told himself he did not have time, that the boy was enough, that he was being sentimental. But some part of him was already listening, already waiting, already half prepared. On the evening he carried a sleeping Harry through a muggle street near the river, and the world tore open, and handed him the answer to a question he had not let himself finish asking. He found her by accident, which he never quite forgave the universe for, because it meant that everything good in the second half of his life had hung on a single burst of raw magic he happened to be close enough to feel. It was the autumn after the next. The boy passed to now and into everything, and Regulus had taken him to the London bolt hole on an errand that required the city. He was in a muggle street near the river at dusk, disguised, ordinary. The boy spelled drowsy and warm in a sling against his chest when the world tore. He felt it before he heard it, a detonation of accidental magic so violent it bowed the air, the unmistakable signature of a young child's power loosed without any control at all. A heartbeat later came the human sound, the screaming and the alarms, and around the corner he saw the house already going up, fire pouring out of the upper windows of a narrow muggle terrace, and he understood the shape of it the way he understood everything, instantly and coldly and completely. A magical child. A fire caused by the child's terror, or merely survived by it, he would never be certain which. And around the burning house, muggle neighbors and the first muggle fire engines, and threading through them already, two figures in the wrong clothes who moved with the particular brisk wrongness of ministry men arrived to tidy up an accidental magic incident before the muggles could think too hard about it. Regulus did the sums before the first ceiling fell. The ministry would obliviate. That was the protocol, dull and mechanical, and applied 100 times a year. Find the source of the magic, wipe the witnesses, restore the ordinary world's faith in itself. But this fire had taken the upper floor, and from the angle of the flames and the screaming below he could read the geometry of it. The parents were on the ground floor alive, being pulled clear by neighbors. The child had been upstairs alone, and her terror had built the inferno around her, and then there he felt it, a second flex of impossible power, had thrown a bubble of unburnable air around one small body in the heart of the fire. The child was alive. The child was the most powerful accidental caster he had felt in years. And the ministry men were going to walk up to a pair of stunned muggle parents who had just watched their house burn with their daughter inside it, and they were going to do their dull mechanical work, and they were going to make a mistake because the ministry made this mistake more than it admitted. They were going to obliviate too widely. They would take the fire. They would take the magic. And in two frightened, grief-blasted parents who could not give a coherent account of their own evening, the careless wandwork would take the daughter too, erase the knowing of her, the way a clumsy hand erases the wrong line on a page. The system was about to make a living child into an orphan and a record into a blank, and no one would ever notice, because the only people who would have noticed were the ones being adjusted. He could have stopped the obliviation. He could not have done it without surfacing, without two ministry men getting a clear look at a dead Death Eater pulling a child out of a fire, and the whole hidden architecture of his survival coming down in an afternoon. He stood at the corner with a borrowed boy asleep against his chest and the heat of a stranger's house on his face, and he weighed a living child against his own concealment. And it was not, in the end, a close thing at all. He went in through the back where the smoke was thickest, and no muggle would follow and no ministry man would bother looking, because ministry men looked where the witnesses were and not where the magic was. The fire parted for him. He had walked through worse to claim Harry, and a muggle house fire was nothing beside a lake of the dead. He climbed through the burning frame of a child's bedroom to a corner where the flames bent away from a sphere of clean cold air. And inside the sphere, sitting upright and furious and entirely unburnt, was a girl of perhaps 3 with a great mass of brown hair and an expression Regulus would later swear was less afraid than affronted, as though the universe had badly mismanaged something and she intended to file a complaint. "You've done remarkable work," he told her, crouching at the edge of her impossible bubble, and he meant it as a fact and she heard it as one. "Now I'm going to take you somewhere the fire can't reach. Will you let me?" She looked at him with eyes that were too old for her face, the way the boy's had been, the way the eyes of children who have learned the world is not safe always are. Then she held up both arms. He took her and the bubble collapsed behind them, and the fire rushed in to fill the place where she had been, and Regulus Black went out the back of a burning muggle house with a borrowed Potter asleep on his chest and a nameless girl in his arms, and behind him in the street 2 ministry men were already raising their wands over 2 parents who would wake tomorrow with a daughter-shaped hole in their lives and no memory that anything had been taken. He did try afterward. He was not a sentimental man, but he was a thorough one, and over the following weeks he made the careful, deniable inquiries a dead man could make. The parents had been wiped clean and resettled. There was no daughter in any record, magical or muggle. The obliviation had been logged as a routine fire witness adjustment and signed off by a tired functionary who would never know what his colleagues' wands had erased. There was no thread to pull that would not unravel the child's whole new life and his own along with it. The girl who had built a fortress of clean air around herself at the age of 3 had been edited out of the world, and the only person who remembered that she had ever existed was a man the world believed was dead. "Then we keep her," he said to Creature, who had already, predictably, lost his entire heart to her. "The world has decided she doesn't exist. Very well. We'll build her a better world than the one that forgot her." He spent 3 weeks before he made her a black, trying to give her back instead. It was the right thing to do, and he knew it, and he hated knowing it. A child had parents somewhere, wiped, resettled, but alive, and the decent act, the act a better man would not have had to argue himself into, was to find them and undo the ministry's clumsy work and restore a daughter to a mother and father who had lost her without knowing they'd lost anything. Regulus was many things the world would have called monstrous, but he had drawn a hard line in a cave about what he would and would not do to children, and leaving one parentless when her parents lived was on the wrong side of it. So he looked. He found them in a fortnight, which was fast, and a measure of how badly he wanted them to be findable. A dentist and his wife, resettled by the ministry's relocation office in a town 200 miles from the fire, given a tidy false history and a vague unexamined sense that they had always lived where they now lived. He watched them for 3 days from across a quiet street, the way he had watched the Dursleys, except that everything in him wanted a different answer this time. They were kind. He could see it in how they were with each other, in how the woman touched the man's arm, in the easy, ordinary warmth of 2 people who loved each other and had room in them to love more. They would have been good parents. They had been good parents for the 3 years the ministry's wands had erased, and there was the wall he could not climb. The obliviation had not merely hidden the daughter. It had taken her not the memory of a specific evening, but the entire fact of her, 3 years of a child unwritten from 2 minds so thoroughly that there was no longer any place in either of them for her to fit. He tested it the only way he safely could, gently, from the edge of their minds, and what he found was not a locked door he could open, but a room that had been removed from the house, the walls grown back over the gap as though it had never been built. To restore her, he would have to rebuild 3 years of 2 people's lives inside their own skulls, memory by memory, a reconstruction so vast and so delicate that the most skilled legilimens alive could not have managed it without breaking them. And even if he could, he would be handing a magical child back to a muggle world in the middle of a war, traceable, unprotected, with a guardian who was legally dead and could not so much as visit. He would be saving his conscience by risking her life. He stood across the street for the 3rd day and did the cruelest arithmetic of his life, and it came out the way the worst sums always did, clean and unanswerable. The parents could not have her back without being destroyed in the having. She could not go to them without going unprotected into the open. And the world had already, through a tired clerk's carelessness, decided she did not exist, had done the terrible thing already, leaving Regulus only the choice of whether the erased child got a life or a grave. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, to 2 people who would never know he had stood there or what he had decided or that they had ever had a daughter at all. He did not let himself look away while he said it. He had learned in the cave that you owe the people you fail at least the courtesy of watching what your choice costs them. "I'd give her back if giving her back didn't kill all 3 of you. I can't, so I'll keep her. And I'll make her so much that one day, if there's ever a way to do it without breaking you, she'll be strong enough to choose it for herself. That's the most I can promise. It isn't enough, it's what there is." He went home to the Hollow that night and did not tell the child where he had been, because she was 3 and the telling would have been for him and not for her. But he never forgot the street, or the kind ordinary couple, or the room that had been removed from 2 minds, and years later, when Hermione Black grew into the most relentless witch of her generation, and turned that relentlessness on every problem the world said was impossible, Regulus would think of a fortnight's search and a sum that wouldn't balance, and understand that he had not only kept her. He had handed her, without meaning to, the shape of the work she would spend her life doing, which was finding the door in the wall that everyone else had read past. He had taken Harry to keep a piece off Dumbledore's board. He had taken the girl because the alternative was leaving a living child to burn in a clerk's mistake. Those were 2 different reasons, and a tidier man would have kept the 2 children at the proper distance the reasons implied, one a charge, one a rescue, both kept and neither truly his. Regulus thought about it for exactly one evening, and then he did the thing that was either the great strategic insight of his life or the great surrender of it, and he was never able to decide which, because they turned out to be the same thing. He made them twins. Not of blood, he had no power over blood and would not have wanted it, of the house. He sat in the cold library with the two of them asleep down the corridor, and he laid the whole problem out in the cold accountant's room at the back of his head, and the arithmetic came out clean and surprising. A single heir was a single point of failure. He of all people knew how easily a single life could be ended or shelved or turned. Two heirs were a redundancy and a strength. Two heirs raised together, bound to each other before they were bound to anything else, would be a force no one could divide, because the oldest way to break a house is to set its heirs against one another, and there would be nothing between these two to break. The girl's mind was already at 3, the most relentless thing he had ever encountered in a child. She would be the house's law and its memory. The boy's power was already at 2, something that made the wards of the hollow hum when he was angry. He would be its strength and its heart. Apart they were a rescue and a hostage. Together they were the restoration of House Black. That was the arithmetic, and it was true, and it was not why he did it. He did it because he had spent 2 years in a dead man's house keeping a promise to a wall of names, and the wall had been silent and the names had been dead, and now there were 2 children asleep down the corridor who were warm and alive in his, and a man can survive almost anything except being given something to lose. He had been given 2. He was not going to be careful with the gift. He was going to be reckless with it in the only way he had left, which was to make it permanent. He took the girl into the ritual room first, because she was the one the world had unmade, and she was the one who needed the right most. He performed the blood adoption the family had used for 9 centuries to bring in the children it chose to keep. 3 drops of his own blood, 3 of hers, the old grammar of mine spoken over a child who had no other name the world would honor. The candles flared. The cold mark on his chest warmed just slightly for the first time since the locket. And in a tapestry in a London drawing room, in a patch of bare wool below the burned scorch of Sirius and the closed parenthesis of Regulus himself, a new thread of gold began, impossibly, to grow, a name the house had never recorded stitching itself into being because the house had been told, in its own oldest language, that this child was black. Hermione, he said, because she had to be called something and the old astronomy of the family names did not fit her and he would not force it. She was going to be her own, first of her kind. He gave her the surname instead, which was the part that mattered. Hermione Black, daughter of the house, and the boy down the corridor is your brother in every way that this family has ever counted, which is the only way that has ever held. She was 3. She did not understand a word of it. But she had stopped being affronted at the universe, and she had begun instead to watch him with the particular fierce attention of a child deciding whom to belong to, and Regulus, who had been watched that way exactly twice in his life and was about to be watched that way for the rest of it, found that he could meet it. He brought Harry in last, and he stood the 2 of them together in the candlelight, the boy with the warm scar and the girl with the 2 old eyes, both of them solemn in the way small children are solemn when they sense that something true is happening even if they cannot name it, and he spoke the last of the old words over both of them at once, binding them not as lord and heir, not yet, but as the 2 children of a sleeping house. Twin keepers of a creed their guardian had rewritten in a cave and a drawing room and meant to spend his life proving. Above them, charmed into the ceiling of the ritual room, the constellations of the family turned slowly in their ancient courses: Regulus the lion's heart, Sirius the dog star, Bellatrix the warrior, Arcturus and Cygnus, and all the cold bright dead of the House of Black wheeling overhead. The boy looked up at them and pointed and said a word that was almost star. The girl looked up at them and frowned already at the gaps where the chart was wrong. "I'll teach you all of them," Regulus told them both. Every name, including the ones they burned off, especially those. That night he put them to bed in the same room, 2 small beds beneath a window that looked out on the dark Welsh wood, with Creature standing guard in the doorway and the wooden snake passed between them by some negotiation Regulus did not witness and never asked about. He stood in the corridor a long time after their breathing went slow and even, and he understood that the dead man's plan had finished, and a living man's life had begun without his quite agreeing to it, and that he would not have agreed to it if asked, and that he would now defend it against the whole world, against Dumbledore and the Ministry and the Dark Lord misplaced in his hidden vessel and anyone else who came, with a ferocity that frightened even him. "Always faithful," he said into the dark, to 2 sleeping children who would grow up taking the words for granted the way other children took the sky for granted, which was exactly how he wanted it. Then Regulus Black, who was dead, went to bed in a house full of the living and slept. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3. Raised as Blacks, by the time Harry was 7 he could put a man through a wall, and by the time Hermione was 8 she could explain to him exactly why he shouldn't. The lesson that morning was on the lawn behind the hollow, where the grass had been worn to bare earth in 2 rings by years of the same work. Regulus stood between his children with his hands behind his back and his coat buttoned against the autumn cold, and he watched them the way a master watches apprentices he has decided are worth the disappointment. The Again, he said, Harry, disarm her without setting anything on fire. Harry set the hedge on fire. It was not deliberate, which was the problem. The disarming charm left his wand clean and bright and far stronger than it had any business being from a 7-year-old, and Hermione's wand spun out of her hand exactly as ordered, and the overflow, the surplus of power Harry could not yet bank, jumped sideways into the nearest living thing, and the hedge went up in a sheet of orange. Hermione, disarmed, did not bother retrieving her wand. She turned and looked at the burning hedge and then at her brother with the expression of a small queen whose general has won the battle and lost the baggage train. You always do that, she said. I disarmed you, Harry said. You disarmed me and burned an acre of Wales. If you'd done that in front of someone who mattered, they'd know exactly how much power you have, which Regulus says is the one thing we never let anyone know. She crossed her arms. Control isn't doing the spell. Control is doing only the spell. Regulus said nothing. He had learned raising them that his most effective tool was silence. The girl could not bear an unfilled space and would rush to fill it with the right answer, and the boy could not bear being lectured by his sister and would rush to prove he had heard. He put the hedge out himself with a flick that the two of them tracked with hungry eyes, economy, no overflow, the spell and nothing but the spell, and he let the silence work. Show me, Harry said finally to him, not to her, how you bank it. Your sister just told you how. She told you what it's for. The how is practice and the why is survival, and the why is the one I care about. Regulus crouched to the boy's level in the wet grass. Listen to me. You are stronger than I am. You will be stronger than almost anyone you ever meet. That is a fact, and it is not a virtue, and the world has a particular fate reserved for powerful young men who think their power excuses them from thought. They become weapons other people aim. Your father's friends, he stopped because he did not often go there. Powerful men died young in the last war because power made them brave and brave made them careless. You will not be careless. You will be the most careful, powerful man who ever lived, because your sister will be standing next to you telling you when to stop, and you will listen to her because she is almost always right, and on the days she is wrong more carefully than you are right. Harry looked at Hermione. Hermione looked for once faintly embarrassed, which on her was a kind of pleasure she did not have a defense against. And Hermione, Regulus turned. Power is not the only thing that gets aimed, so does cleverness. The cleverest witch of her generation is exactly as useful to a man like Dumbledore as the strongest wizard, and exactly as dangerous to herself if she lets him aim her. You will be no one's instrument, not even mine, especially not mine. You understand me? You want us to be able to disobey you, Hermione said slowly. It was not a question, she was testing the shape of it. I want you to be the kind of people who could and choose not to. That's the only loyalty worth a damn. The other kind I had, it's where the cold spot on my chest comes from. He stood. Again, both of you, Harry, only the spell. Hermione, get your wand back before you start dispensing judgment. A disarmed strategist is a very confident corpse. They did it again. The hedge survived. The argument that earned her his respect happened over a book, which was the only place Hermione ever started a war. She was 8 and she had read, in defiance of 3 separate instructions to leave the locked case alone, the whole of the family's treatise on the law of magical inheritance, the dense, vicious, beautiful body of custom and statute by which the old houses held what they held. She came to Regulus at dinner with the book open and her finger on a line and her chin set at the angle he had learned to dread and admire. You told us the black seat in the Wisengamot can't be claimed until there's a confirmed lord of the house, she said, and there isn't one because Sirius is in Azkaban and you're dead, so the seat sits empty and the Malfoys vote it by proxy. You told us that. I did, it's true. It's wrong. She turned the book toward him. It's not true. The proxy only holds while the line is in question. Section 11. A confirmed heir, not a lord, an heir recognized by the family magic, can petition to suspend the proxy and freeze the seat. They can't vote it, but they can stop Lucius Malfoy from voting it, and the family magic recognized Harry and me 2 years ago. We're confirmed heirs. We could have frozen that seat the whole time, and you let Malfoy keep voting our house's vote because you said we couldn't touch it. Regulus put down his fork. He had read that treatise 40 years worth of times, as a boy and as a hunted man, and he had read Section 11 and discounted it because petitioning required surfacing and surfacing was death, and he had compressed the whole calculation into we can't touch the seat without ever telling the children the second clause. The girl had found the second clause. The girl had found it and understood that his can't was a won't wearing a disguise, and she had called it across the dinner table at the age of 8. You're right, he said. Harry's head came up. Across the table, both children went very still, because you're right was the rarest sentence in the house, and Regulus did not spend it on courtesies. I told you can't when I meant won't, Regulus went on. I won't, because petitioning the ministry means becoming visible, and being visible means I die for real, and the two of you become wards of a state that would hand you straight to Dumbledore. The cost is too high to pay yet. You're right that I hid the choice from you by pretending it wasn't one, and that was a poor way to teach you, because the entire point of teaching you the law is so that you can see the choices I can't. He looked at her and he let her see that he meant it. Don't let me do that again. When I tell you something is impossible, make me prove it's impossible and not merely expensive. That distinction is the whole of politics. You found it on your own at 8. Most Wisengamot members die without finding it. Hermione did not smile. She did something better and rarer. She set the victory aside without gloating on it and immediately asked the next question, which was when does the cost come down, and Regulus, who had not expected to enjoy being corrected by a child, found that he had never enjoyed anything more. Later, drying the dishes the Muggle way because Creature insisted the children learn that magic was a choice and not a crutch, Harry bumped his shoulder against his sister's. You made him say you're right, he said. There was no jealousy in it. There had never in the whole of their lives been jealousy in it. Regulus had built them too carefully for that. Nobody makes him say that. I made him say I found the choice, Hermione corrected, because she was incapable of accepting a compliment she hadn't audited. He'd already found it years ago. I just made him admit it was there. She passed him a plate. We're better together. He keeps saying it like it's a strategy. I think it's just true. Harry took the plate and didn't answer, because at 8 he did not yet have words for the thing that lived in the space between we're better together and whatever it was going to become. And neither did she, and Regulus, listening from the next room, heard the silence and understood it better than they did and decided, for once in his life, to leave a thing alone and let it grow at its own pace. The near exposure came the winter Harry was 9, and it taught all 3 of them what protection actually cost. They were not supposed to leave the wards alone. It was the oldest and hardest rule in the house, older than the rule about the locked cases, older than the rules about overflow. You do not cross the boundary stones without me. But Hermione had wanted a particular kind of lichen that grew only on the north face of the valley for a potion she was determined to brew correctly, and Harry had gone with her because Harry went everywhere with her, and a hiker had come down off the hills out of the snow. A wizard, as it turned out, a harmless, rambling old enchanter cataloging magical flora, the most innocent man in Wales, and he had seen 2 children where no children should be. In a valley Muggles forgot and wizards did not know existed. He had been kind. That was the thing Harry could never quite get past afterward. The man had crouched in the snow and asked their names with a smile, and Hermione had lied beautifully and instantly, the way Regulus had drilled into them, a false name and a false village and a false reason. But the man had glanced at the boy beside her, at the untidy black hair and the green eyes, and Harry had watched recognition begin to dawn on a stranger's face. The slow, terrible arithmetic of that scar, those eyes, but the boy is supposed to be in Surrey. And Harry had understood in his bones that the kind old enchanter was 3 seconds from working out that he was looking at the missing boy who lived. Harry did not set anything on fire. He had learned that much. What he did was worse and better. He reached into the man's mind with the raw, untrained edge of a gift Regulus had only begun to teach him, and he took the last 10 minutes out of it, clumsily, the way a child takes the cream off the top of the milk, and he took a little too much, because he was 9 and frightened, and his control over his power was still the thing he was worst at. And the kind old enchanter sat down suddenly in the snow with his eyes gone vague, and his catalogue of flowers and his memory of 2 children, and a small grey wedge of his own self all gone together. They got him to the edge of the village before he came back to himself, blinking, with a headache he would blame on the cold. He never knew what he had lost. But Harry knew and Hermione knew, and when Regulus found them shaking in the kitchen an hour later and pulled the whole story out of them in 6 clipped questions, his face did a thing neither of them had seen before and never forgot. He was not angry. They had braced for anger and would have welcomed it. He was afraid, and the fear came out of him as a cold so total that the warm kitchen seemed to drop 10 degrees, and he sat them both down at the table, and he did not raise his voice once, which was how they knew how badly they had frightened him. You crossed the stones, he said. Because you crossed the stones, a kind man is going to wake up tomorrow a little less than he was forever, and you, he looked at Harry, you reached into a living mind at 9 years old with no training and no governor, and you took too much, because that is what untrained power does, it takes too much. You could have killed him. You could have hollowed him out the way the potion hollowed me. Do you understand that the thing you did to protect your sister is 1 curse short of the things I took the mark to do? Harry had gone white. He was going to know who I was. Yes, he was, and the correct response to that was the one your sister was already executing, a lie, a redirection, a walk away. The witness who suspects is a problem you solve with patience. The witness who is certain is a problem you solve with a memory charm performed by someone who knows how, which is me, which is why the rule is that you do not cross the stones without me. He leaned forward. I am not angry that you protected each other. I will never be angry about that. It is the one thing I built you to do above all others. I am terrified because today I learned that you will protect each other past the edge of what's safe and past the edge of what's right, and I will not always be there to do the protecting cleanly. So you're going to learn to do it cleanly, both of you. Harry, you're going to master that gift until you can take a single minute as gently as drawing a thread, And Hermione, you're going to learn it too, because the day will come when he's the one bleeding on the floor and you're the one who has to keep both your heads." He stood. At the door he stopped, and the cold went out of him all at once, and what was left was just a tired man who had nearly lost everything and hadn't. "You did the wrong thing for the right reason," he said, more quietly. "That's better than the reverse. It's most of what I am. But I want better than most of what I am for the two of you. Go to bed. We start the mind work tomorrow." That night Hermione climbed out of her own bed and into the chair by Harry's, the way she had when they were very small, and the wood snake had been the whole of diplomacy between them, and she did not say anything because there was nothing to say, and Harry did not send her away. They had frightened the one fixed point in their world. They had done it together. Whatever else it meant they would never again be people who could be frightened alone. The mind work was the hardest thing Regulus ever taught them, and it was the thing that bound them past unbinding. Occlumency, he told them, was not a wall. A wall was what frightened people built, and walls fell. It was an ordering of the self, a house you kept so well that an intruder found only the rooms you chose to leave open. He taught them to build it the way he taught them everything, by making them do it badly first and then refusing to let them stop. Hermione built a library, of course, endless and catalogued, every memory shelved and silent. Harry built nothing so tidy. His mind was a great hall like the Hollows, and the things he wanted hidden he simply set behind a fire that would burn anyone who reached for them, which Regulus called effective and reckless in the same breath, and made him practice until the fire stopped flaring at the people he loved. The dangerous part was the second half. Regulus taught them to defend, and then, because he was thorough and because the world was not kind, he taught them to enter, and the only minds safe to practice entering were each other's. "You'll do this only here, only with each other, never anywhere else," he said the first night, with the two of them sitting knee to knee in the candlelit ritual room. "Legilimency between strangers is an assault. Between the two of you it's something else, and I'm trusting you with it because you're going to need it, and because I would rather you learn the shape of another mind from someone who would never use it against you than learn it the way I did." He did not say how he had learned it. The cold mark on his chest said it for him. So they learned each other from the inside. Harry went into Hermione's library and found it exactly as relentless and exactly as frightened as he'd always suspected. Shelf after shelf of every fact she had ever hoarded against the day the world tried to erase her again, and underneath it all in the deepest stack, the thing she never said aloud, the small cold certainty that she had once been wiped from existence and could be again, and that the only proof she was real was how much she knew. He did not touch it. He backed out of the library and never told her he had seen it, and he understood his sister completely from that night, which was a different thing from knowing her, and a heavier one. Hermione went into Harry's great hall and found the fire, and behind the fire, where he thought he had hidden it, the thing he never said aloud either, that some animal part of him still remembered a cupboard and a cold doorstep and the precise quality of not being wanted, and that everything he did, all the power and the loyalty and the readiness to put a man through a wall for her, was built on a single childhood conviction that he had to earn his place or be put back outside. She walked through his fire without being burned because the fire had never once been meant for her, and she sat down beside the small wanting thing he was ashamed of, and she did not fix it because it could not be fixed, and she let him feel her not leaving. They came out of it shaking, both of them 11 and 12, and turned inside out, and Regulus took one look at their faces and did not ask what they had seen. "Now you know why I made you twins," was all he said. "Most people spend their whole lives hoping someone will see the inside of them and not run. You two got it over with at 12. Everything after this is easier." He was wrong about that, as it turned out, but he was right about the thing that mattered. After that night there was no door between them, and there never would be again, and the slow thing growing in the space between were better together, and whatever it would become took root, that night, in soil neither of them could ever again pretend was only siblinghood. Creature taught them the tapestry because Regulus could not bear to. There was a copy of it at the Hollow, not the great original in the London house, but a true working copy the family kept, the same gold thread, the same burned scorches, the same 900 years of names. On the long winter evenings Creature would stand the children in front of it with a candle and walk them through the dead, and the dead came alive in his cracked, devoted voice in a way they never would have in a book. This one married a goblin's banker, and the family pretended for 40 years that she had not. This one fought a duel over a hat. This one, young master, young mistress. This one was burned off the wall the day he ran away to live with the blood traders and the muggle lovers, and the mistress wept and screamed and burned his face from the wool with her own wand, and Creature held the candle for her, and Creature did not yet know that the boy who ran was the only black with the sense to run. "Serious," Hermione said. She had worked it out long ago. She worked everything out long ago. "That's your brother," this to Regulus, who had come to stand silently in the doorway as he often did during the tapestry lessons, never entering, never leaving. "That's my brother," Regulus agreed, "who is in Azkaban for a murder I am increasingly certain he didn't commit, and who I cannot help without surfacing, and who therefore sits on a rock in the sea while his face stays burned off a wall. There's a lesson in him if you want it. What lesson? Harry asked. That the house punished the one son who saw clearly and rewarded the one who saw clearly too late. Regulus came into the room then, which he almost never did, and he put a hand on each child's shoulder and looked with them at the burned place where his brother's face had been. The whole point of you two is that you're going to see clearly, and in time, you're going to restore these names. Not the blood purity, that rot dies with me, I've already buried it. The names, the people, the ones who were burned off for marrying wrong or loving wrong or thinking wrong. I'm going to teach you the right that puts a name back on this wall, and one day you're going to walk into that London house and you're going to put my brother's face back where my mother burned it off, and his cousins, the one who married the Muggle-born, and every other black this family threw away for being better than it was. Hermione was looking at the head of the tapestry where the gold words sat, Tauger's purr. You changed what it means, she said. Always faithful, not always pure, but the wool still says pure. The wool says what the family believed. We're going to change what the family believes, which is harder than changing wool and takes longer. Regulus's hand tightened just slightly on each shoulder. There are 2 new threads on this wall that weren't here when I was a boy. Find them. They found them. Low on the wall, below the burned scorches of Sirius and the closed parenthesis of Regulus's own false death, 2 threads of gold growing where no thread had been recorded, Harry James Black, and beside it Hermione Black, a name the house had never known, stitched into a 900-year-old web because a dead man had told the deep magic to count her. Hermione touched her own name on the wall and did not say anything for a moment. The girl the world had erased was written in gold into the oldest record her new family kept, in a place no clerk's wand could reach. It can't be wiped, she said. It was the thing she had been most afraid of without ever once saying so, and Regulus, who missed nothing, had given her the answer before she'd had to ask the question. No, he said. Not by the Ministry, not by Dumbledore, not by anyone. The wall doesn't forget what the blood has counted. You're on it forever, and so is he, and your names are next to each other because that's how I bound you and that's how it'll stay. He looked at the 2 threads, growing side by side, twined a little where the wool met. Twin heirs of the house. You'll hear me say it like it's strategy. Your sister's already worked out that it's also just true. Harry 11 looked at the 2 gold names growing side by side on the wall, his and hers, twined where they met, and felt something he didn't have a word for and wouldn't have one for years, and chose, without knowing he was choosing, not to look at Hermione while he felt it, which was the first wholly grown-up thing he ever did. There was an evening the summer he turned 10 and she was 11 that neither of them ever mentioned again and neither of them ever forgot. It was nothing on the surface. They had been set to memorize the seats of the Wisengamot, all of them, the ancient houses and the merely wealthy ones, the alliances and the feuds, and who had married whom to bury which grudge, and they had carried the work outside because the night was warm, and they had ended up lying on their backs on the worn training ground earth with the real stars overhead instead of the charmed ones in the ritual room ceiling. Greengrass votes with not but only because not holds a debt, Hermione recited, and the debt comes due in, you're not even looking at the chart. I don't need the chart, I need you to test me, which you're not doing because you're looking at the sky. She turned her head. He was in fact looking at the sky, and then he was looking at her, and there was a moment, brief and enormous, where the recitation simply stopped and neither of them filled the silence, which for Hermione was unprecedented and for both of them was a small earthquake. Then Harry said, Greengrass and not. The debt comes due the year you turn 17, which Regulus says is no accident, because 17 is when an heir can be made lord. And Hermione said, yes, exactly, the timing's the whole point. And the moment closed over like water, and they went on with the chart, and the stars wheeled, and somewhere in the house a dead man who missed nothing decided once again to miss this one thing on purpose, because some things a guardian cannot teach and should not try to, and can only protect by pretending not to see. They were 10 and 11, they had the rest of their lives. Regulus intended, with everything cold and exact and ferocious in him, to make sure they got it. The game was called Houses, and Regulus had invented it, and it was the most ruthless thing the children played. It was politics made into a board, the great families laid out as pieces, the seats and the debts and the marriages and the feuds, and a problem set against the clock. House Greengrass needs House Not's vote and cannot afford House Not's price. Find the third move. The children played it most evenings, and they played it against each other, and they played to win, because Regulus had told them once that a strategist who has never lost a game she cared about will fold the first time the stakes are real. So he made the stakes real in the only currency children value, which was each other's respect, and he watched them learn to be merciless in a room where mercilessness could cost them nothing worse than a sibling's smirk. Hermione won more often. She held the whole board in her head, every debt and grudge 3 moves deep, and she played the long, patient game Regulus himself favored. But Harry won in ways that unsettled her, because Harry did not play the board, he played the people on it. He would look at a problem she had solved with 3 elegant moves and find a 4th that was uglier and faster, built not on what a house should rationally do, but on what a frightened or proud or grieving lord would actually do, and half the time he was right, and it drove Hermione to a fury that was 3 parts admiration. "You can't just decide Lord Knot is too proud to take the deal," she said one evening after he'd beaten her with exactly that. "Pride isn't a rule, you can't calculate pride." "You can't calculate it, I can feel it," Harry shrugged. "You see the board, I see the man sitting at it deciding he'd rather lose with his dignity than win looking weak. Regulus says that's half of politics, knowing which men would rather be right than win, and which would rather win than be right, and never confusing the two." Regulus, refereeing from his chair, allowed himself the quiet satisfaction of a teacher watching two students become better than the sum of his lessons, and then caught himself, because it was not a quiet satisfaction at all, it was an enormous one, and he had spent too long pretending his pride in them was a modest thing. "He's right," he said. "And so are you, Hermione, which is the point I keep making and you keep refusing to hear because you'd rather win the argument. You see the board he can't see. He sees the men you won't. Apart you're each formidable and beatable. Together you're a thing I genuinely do not know how to defeat, and I built you, and I've been trying to find the hole in you for years, and the closest I've come is to make you play against each other so that neither of you forgets how it feels to lose. Don't ever let anyone make you play alone, that's the whole lesson, everything else is footnotes." "You always say that like someone's going to try," Hermione said. "Someone is always going to try. The first thing any enemy does with a pair who can't be beaten together is work out how to make them face the world separately." Regulus reset the board. "Dumbledore will try it kindly, a place for one of you somewhere the other can't follow, an honor, an opportunity, a reasonable separation no reasonable person could refuse. Lucius Malfoy will try it cruelly. The Dark Lord's people, if they ever learn you exist, will try it with a knife. And the only defense, the only one, is to have decided long before it happens that you do not get divided, not for honors, not for safety, not for the greater good." He looked between them. "Promise me that now, while it's only a game, so that when it stops being a game the promise is already old." They promised the way children promise things they don't yet fully understand, and the promise sat in them and grew, and years later, on a roof, in a churchyard, in a scoured valley, each of them would feel the old promise hold like a ward they'd forgotten they were standing inside. That night, clearing the board, their hands met over the same piece, the little carved figure that stood for the House of Black, the only piece on the board that was theirs, and they both reached for it at once, the way they reached for everything at once, and there was a moment where 4 fingers rested on one small carved figure and neither of them moved. And the moment went on a beat too long, and then Hermione took her hand back and Harry set the piece in its box, and neither of them said anything. Because they were 11 and 12, and there were no words yet for the thing that lived in the place where their hands kept meeting. Regulus, gathering the rest of the pieces, saw it and said nothing, and let it grow. The house answered Harry the spring he turned 10, and that was the night Regulus knew the hiding was nearly over. It happened during a storm. The wards of the Hollow were old and layered, generations of black magic stacked one on the next, and most of them were keyed to acknowledge the lord of the house, a lord the house had not had since Orion died. They tolerated Regulus as caretaker. They had never been asked to do more because Regulus had never asked. A dead man does not wake the deep wards of his ancestors and risk the question of who he is. But Harry, 10 years old and furious about something his sister had said, and pacing the corridors at midnight while the storm threw the wood against the windows, put his hand against the old stone of the central hall to steady himself, and the house woke. Regulus felt it from his bed like a hand laid over his cold scar. He was down the stairs before the second peal of thunder, and what he found stopped him in the doorway. His son standing in the center of the great hall with one hand flat against the ancient stone, and every ward in the house answering him, lighting in sequence up the walls and across the ceiling, threads of old gold magic waking one after another, and turning toward the boy the way iron turns toward a lodestone. The constellation chart charmed into the high ceiling had come alive and was wheeling, the cold bright dead of the family, Regulus the lion's heart, Sirius the dog star, all of them burning down at the child who had touched the house and been recognized. Harry's eyes were wide. He wasn't doing it on purpose. He had no idea how to stop it. "It's talking to me," he said, and his voice cracked on it, half terror and half wonder. "Regulus, the house is, it knows my name, it's saying my name, don't pull away." Regulus crossed the hall slowly, his bare feet silent on the cold stone, and he did not let the boy see what was happening in his own chest, which was the cold mark warming and warming as the house roared its recognition through the blood that connected all of them. "It's not hurting you, it's asking a question. It's been asleep for 10 years with no lord to answer it, and it just felt the blood of the house standing in its heart at full power for the first time, and it wants to know, are you the one? Are you the one who's come to wake us?" "What do I say?" Harry whispered. "Nothing, not tonight. You're not the Lord yet. You're not even a confirmed heir in the eyes of the ministry, only in the eyes of the blood. If you answer the house tonight, you'll bind yourself to it before you understand what you're binding to, and I won't let you make that choice in the dark in your nightshirt at the age of 10. Regulus reached him and put both hands over the boy's hand on the stone, his own cold marked palm in the warm one, and he felt the wards push against them both, eager, ancient, awake. We tell it not yet, we tell it soon, like this, with me. Together they pressed the recognition back, not a rejection. The house would not have understood a rejection from its own blood, but a deferral, not yet, soon, sleep a little longer, and the wards subsided, the gold threads dimming back into the stone one by one, the constellations slowing in the ceiling until they hung still and cold and ordinary again. The storm went on outside. Inside, the great hall ticked and settled like a creature lying back down. Hermione was in the doorway. She had felt it too, in her bones if not in her blood. She always felt what touched Harry. She looked at the dimming walls and at her brother's shaking hand under Regulus's and at the man's face, which he had forgotten to keep arranged, and what she saw there made her come the rest of the way into the hall and take Harry's other hand without a word. Regulus stood with both his children's hands in the heart of the waking house, and he made the decision he had been deferring for 10 years, the way the house had just deferred its question. "It's time," he said, "not tonight, but soon. The house knows you're here now, Harry, it's felt you, and a house that has felt its air doesn't go all the way back to sleep. The deep magic will start to surface whether I let it or not. Which means the Ministry's lineage instruments will start to register it, and Dumbledore's, and the longer we wait the more it looks like we were hiding, which we were." He looked between them, the strongest wizard he had ever raised and the cleverest witch, 10 and 11, holding each other's hands in the dark. "We've had 11 years, it's enough, it has to be enough. This summer I'm going to make you heirs of the House of Black in truth and in law, and the world is going to find out that the house everyone wrote off as dead has 2 children in it, and nothing after that is ever going to be quiet again." "Good," said Harry, who was 10 and frightened and had just been recognized by 900 years of his family, and who had decided in that moment that he was done being a secret. "Good," said Hermione, who had been a secret since the day a clerk's wand erased her from the world, and who had wanted, more than she had ever told anyone, to be written somewhere that could not be wiped. Regulus looked at the two of them and at the dark settled house around them, full of the warm living and the cold gold dead, and he thought that he had spent 11 years keeping a promise to a wall of names, and that the wall was about to find out he had meant it. "Then we begin," he said. "Go to bed. Both of you, the next part of your lives starts in the morning and you'll want to be rested for it. They almost never are." Chapter 3 and Chapter 4. Heirs of the house. The ritual room beneath the hollow had waited 900 years for the night Regulus had been deferring for 11, and when he finally unlocked the inner door, the cold of it came up the stairs to meet them like a held breath released. It was not a large room. The old magic never needed much space. It needed depth, and the room had that black stone walls that went down past any foundation a builder would have laid, and the constellation chart turning slow and cold across the vaulted ceiling, every star of the family burning in its ancient station. In the center stood a plain stone basin, and beside it a small iron casket Regulus had carried up from the deepest vault that morning, and not yet opened. Harry and Hermione stood at the threshold in the robes creature had made them, true black robes, dark and severe, the first formal clothes either had ever worn, and they looked younger in them than they did in their training gear, which was the cruelty of formality, that it made children look like the dead they descended from. "Tonight you stop being children I'm hiding," Regulus said, "and become heirs the world will have to account for. I want you to understand the difference before we begin, because there's no undoing it. A hidden child can disappear again. An heir of an ancient and most noble house is written into the magic of Britain itself, into the wards of the Ministry, into the ledgers of Gringotts, into the deep registry the goblins keep that no government has ever been allowed to read. After tonight you will be findable, by me, by the goblins, by Dumbledore, by anyone with the law and the instruments to look. The hiding ends here." He looked between them. "I've given you 11 years to become people who could survive being found. If either of you wants to stay hidden, say so now, and I'll close the door and we'll talk about it tomorrow as a family. This is the last choice you make as my secret. Make it freely." Hermione spoke first because she always knew her own mind first. "I was erased once by a clerk who didn't even know my name." Her voice did not shake. She had decided this years ago, the night she found her name on the wall. "I'm not going to spend my life grateful to be a secret. Write me into the world so deep it can never take me out again." "Same," Harry said. "I'm done being a cupboard somebody locked. Open it." Regulus opened the casket. The ring inside it was not beautiful. That was the first thing the cosmic Baroque chroniclers always got wrong about the great heirlooms. The truly old ones were past beauty, into something heavier, a band of black gold worn nearly shapeless by centuries of hands, set with a stone so dark it seemed to drink the candlelight the way the cave had drunk the green. The black signet. The ring of the lord of the house, which no living black could wear, because the man entitled to it rotted in Azkaban and the man who held it in trust was officially a corpse. "I can't make you lord and lady tonight," Regulus said. "The lordship is Sirius's by right while he lives, even from a cell, and the ring will not lie about that. If I tried to put it on you, it would refuse you and might do worse. We're not here to claim the lordship. We're here to make you heirs apparent, the recognized, registered, legally armored heirs of the house, with the right to act in its name, hold its lesser seats, draw on its accounts, and stop Lucius Malfoy from voting our vote. That's what the right does. It tells the world's deep magic. These two are the future of House Black, and they are no longer to be ignored. He set the ring on the rim of the basin where it sat like a small black sun. Harry, you first. You're of the blood. The right will know you. 3 drops, the lineage, and your hand on the ring, not wearing it, only touching. The house will do the rest. Harry stepped to the basin. He had been bleeding for ritual since he was small. He opened the line across his palm without flinching and let 3 drops fall, and he spoke the lineage Regulus had drilled into him until he could recite it asleep. Harry James, son of Charles and Doria of the House of Black, and he laid his bleeding hand over the cold black stone of the ring. The room woke the way the great hall had woken in the storm, but where that had been a question, this was an answer, and the answer was enormous. The constellations overhead stopped turning and turned instead to face the boy. The black stone of the ring filled with light not reflected, but its own, a deep red gold like the heart of old iron, and the light ran up Harry's arm and into his chest, and the boy gasped, not in pain, in recognition, as 900 years of a family reached through their last true son of the blood and took hold of him. Regulus felt his own cold mark blaze with borrowed warmth. And in a tapestry 100 miles north, in a London drawing room, the gold thread that read Harry James Black flared so bright that Walburga Black's sleeping portrait woke screaming, though no living person was there to hear it. Now the world knows your blood, Regulus said, when the light had banked back down into the stone and Harry stood swaying and luminous and confirmed. Step back, Hermione. She came to the basin, and here the right was harder, and they both knew it, and Regulus did not pretend otherwise. You're not of the blood, he said quietly for her ears, though Harry heard. The right I did when you were 3 made you black in the family magic, the way a true blood adoption does. That's why you're on the wall, that's why you can't be wiped. But the ring is older and stricter than the wall, and it has the right to test an adoption the wall accepts. When you touch it, it's going to ask whether you're truly of the house, and the answer it's looking for isn't in your blood, because your blood isn't black. The answer is in whether the house has truly taken you. If it has, the ring will know it. If there's any part of you that still believes you're a borrowed child the universe might reclaim. He met her eyes. The ring will find that part, and it will tell you no, and it will hurt. So I need you to know before you touch it the thing I've never said plainly, because you're not a child who needs things said plainly. You are my daughter, not my ward, not Harry's companion, not a strategic redundancy, whatever I let myself pretend the night I bound you. The house took you completely 8 years ago, and so did I, and if the ring says otherwise, the ring is wrong and will find another way. Now, 3 drops, and don't you dare flinch. Hermione Black, who had been erased from the world by a clerk's careless wand and written back into it in gold by a dead man's stubborn love, opened her palm and bled into the basin and spoke the only lineage she had. Hermione of the House of Black, daughter of Regulus who holds the house, sister of Harry who is its blood, and she put her hand on the ring. The room went dark. Every candle, every charmed star, the red gold light still banked in the stone, all of it went out at once, and in the absolute blackness the right reached into Hermione Black to ask its question, and Harry beside her felt her go rigid and heard her breath stop, and did the thing he had been built his whole life to do, which was move toward her in the dark without being asked. He found her bleeding hand on the ring and laid his own over it, the blood of the house over the blood the house had chosen, and he said into the black, fierce and certain, "She's mine. She's ours. Ask me. I'm of the blood, and I say she's of the house." And the house, which had reached into Hermione and found the old cold certainty that she was borrowed and could be reclaimed, found also a second answer laid over the first by its own true son, found Harry's absolute conviction welded to her doubt, and the deep magic did what deep magic does when blood vouches for the chosen. It believed the blood. The light came back all at once, blinding. The black stone of the ring blazed red gold, and the light ran up both their joined hands and into both their chests, and the constellations overhead wheeled to face the two of them together. And 100 miles north the gold thread that read Hermione Black flared as bright as Harry's had, and burned itself permanent and unburnable into wool that had recorded 900 years of the family and had never, until a dead man insisted, recorded a girl the world had thrown away. When it was over they stood gasping and lit and joined at the basin, 2 confirmed heirs apparent of the ancient and most noble House of Black, and Regulus Black stood in the candlelight with his cold mark warm for the first time in 12 years and his face entirely unarranged. And for once in his life he did not say anything clever, because there was nothing clever to say in the presence of the only thing he had ever built that he was unreservedly proud of. "It said yes," Hermione whispered. She was looking at her own hand, still joined with Harry's on the ring, as though she had never seen it before. "It tested me, and it said yes. It said yes because he vouched and because it was true," Regulus said. "Remember that, both of you. Remember what just happened in the dark. There will be people, clever, powerful, well-meaning people, who spend the coming years trying to tell you what you are. That you're a weapon, Harry, that you're an outsider, Hermione." That you belong to a prophecy or a school or a cause or the public good. When they do, you remember that the oldest magic in your family reached all the way into the truth of you and got the answer. And the answer was that you are heirs of an ancient house and you belong to each other and to nothing else. Let them argue with the ring. He separated their hands gently and bound the cuts himself, and he put the ring back in its iron casket, because it was Sirius's and would stay Sirius's until that thread was dealt with. Then he led his two luminous, exhausted, confirmed children up out of the deep cold room into the warm kitchen where Creature had been weeping into the cooking for an hour, and the four of them, the dead man, the elf, and the twin heirs, ate together under the ordinary stars while the deep magic of Britain rearranged itself around two names it had just been forced to learn. The world, as Regulus had promised, did not stay quiet. It took 9 days. He had calculated 8. He allowed himself a private satisfaction at being only 1 day off, which for a system as slow as the Ministry was sniper's precision. The first sign came as it always did through Creature and the elf networks. A junior clerk in the Department of Magical Lineages had logged an anomaly. 2 heir registrations against the House of Black, an extinct line filed by no one, witnessed by no one, simply appearing in the deep registry overnight as accomplished fact. The clerk had not known what to do with it. The clerk had done what clerks do, which was send it upward, and upward in the Ministry of 1991 meant it would cross several desks, and at least one of those desks belonged to a man who paid very good money to be told about exactly this kind of thing. Lucius will have it within the week, Regulus told the children. They were in the London bolt hole now, a narrow shuttered house in a wizarding quarter the family had owned for 2 centuries, because the next phase of the work was in the city. He had a map of the chessboard spread on the table, not a literal map, a thing he'd built in ink in his own hand, the seats and the vaults and the alliances. So before Lucius has it, we're going to do the thing he won't expect, which is move first and in daylight. Hermione, tell me the board. She did without notes the way she'd recited the Wisengamot seats under the stars. The Black estate has 3 pieces a hostile party can contest. 1. The Wisengamot seat, currently voted by proxy by Lucius Malfoy under the line in question rule. 2. The principal Gringotts vaults, frozen since your death and Sirius's imprisonment, administered by the bank under a stewardship clause. 3. The lesser properties and the lesser house seat, which nobody's bothered to contest because they assumed there was no one to claim them. She looked up. We freeze the proxy first. The moment we petition the Wisengamot to suspend Lucius's proxy on the grounds that confirmed heirs now exist, he loses the vote he's been enjoying for 12 years, and he can't get it back without proving we're not legitimate, which he can't because the deep registry already says we are. It's a clean move. It does almost nothing, and it costs him a Wisengamot vote he's grown used to having. And it makes us an enemy, Harry said. He'd been quieter since the rite. The power that ran in him had been spoken to by something enormous, and he was still settling around the fact. A rich, careful, dangerous enemy who spent 12 years thinking our vote was his. Yes, Regulus said, pleased. Both of you are right, which is the point of having both of you. Hermione's right that it's the correct opening move. Harry's right that it's not free. Lucius Malfoy is the single most dangerous living thing between us and the restoration of this house. Not because he's the strongest, he isn't, but because he's patient and rich, and he has a wife I respect and a network in the Ministry I helped build before I died. The day we freeze his proxy, he stops being a man who ignores the Blacks and becomes a man who studies us. So we don't make that move until we've made the other one, the one that gives us the ground to stand on when he comes. We go to the bank. Gringotts had not changed in the 12 years Regulus had been dead, which was its great virtue. The goblins kept faith with their own institutions in a way no human government managed, and a thing that did not change could be used. They went disguised, Regulus heavily, the children lightly, because the children's faces were not yet known and a too careful disguise drew more eyes than a plain one. They were shown, after the correct words were spoken to the correct teller, into a low stone office far from the public floor, where a goblin of evident age and rank sat behind a desk that had been carved before England had a king worth the name. The House of Black, the goblin said, has been dead for 12 years. Its vaults are under stewardship, its lord is in Azkaban, and its last son died childless in 79. He laid his clawed hands flat on the ancient desk. And yet 3 days ago the deep registry, the Ministry, pretends not to know we keep recorded 2 heirs of the line, confirmed by the family magic in a rite performed with the house signet. The bank does not care what the Ministry's clerks make of that. The bank cares what is true, so. His black eyes moved over the 3 of them and settled with the unerring instinct of his kind on the 2 children. Bleed and let us see what the gold says. The gold does not lie and it does not forget, and it has never once been wrong about who is owed. This was the part Regulus had drilled them for hardest, because the goblins' test was older and colder than the Ministry's, and far less forgiving of doubt. Harry and Hermione stepped forward together. They did everything together now, the rite had seen to that, and they bled into the goblin's basin, and the gold in it, ancient and incorruptible, rose to meet their blood the way the wards of the Hollow had risen to meet Harry's hand. It read them. It read the blood of the house in Harry, and it read in Hermione, the deep family magic that had taken her so completely the gold could find no seam where the adoption ended and the house began. The old goblin watched the gold work, and something shifted in his ancient face that might, in a goblin, have been respect. "The gold says you are owed," he said. "Both of you, the blood and the chosen, equally, and the gold has not called an adopted child equal to the blood in 300 years, because 300 years of your family did their adoptions cheaply, for show, for politics. Whoever performed yours," his eyes flicked to the heavily disguised man, and Regulus understood that the goblin knew exactly who he was and would say nothing, because the bank's discretion was the thing it sold and it did not sell cheaply, performed it as though it were true. "The gold respects that. The bank will recognize you both as heirs apparent. Your vaults are unfrozen to you under the heirs clause. And I will tell you something the ministry's clerks will never tell you, because they don't know it and wouldn't understand it if they did." He leaned forward. "The stewardship of your principal vault was assigned, by an order filed 12 years ago, to a trustee with discretion over its contents. That trustee has visited the vault 4 times. The bank does not say who. The bank only says, an heir of the house has the right to know that someone with a key has been counting your family's gold for 12 years, and to ask why." Regulus went very still behind his disguise. He had expected the seat and the vaults to be contested. He had not expected a trustee with 4 visits, and his cold-running mind ran instantly down the short list of people with the power to install themselves as discreet steward over a dead house's fortune, and the list had one name on it that mattered, and the name was Albus Dumbledore, who did not want gold and never had, and who therefore had been visiting a dead family's vault 4 times in 12 years for some reason that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with the kind of long game Regulus had spent his life learning to read. "We'll want the trustee's name," Hermione said, before Regulus could decide whether to ask. She had caught the same thread, of course she had, as the confirmed heirs were entitled to it. "You're entitled to petition for it," the old goblin corrected, with the faint pleasure of a creature who lived inside rules and enjoyed watching humans discover their edges. "Which is a different thing and slower, and the trustee will be notified the moment you do, which means the trustee will know you're looking before you know what you're looking at. The bank advises patience. The bank also notes that it has no obligation to advise patience to clients it respects, and that it respects clients who restore what was thrown away." He sat back. "Your vaults are open. Your house is recognized. Welcome back to the world, heirs of Black. Try to be more interesting than your ancestors. Most of them were merely rich." They went down to the principal vault before they left the bank, because the old goblin had said a thing about a trustee and 4 visits, and Regulus did not leave threads like that untouched. The cart ride went deeper than either child had imagined the world went, down past the levels the public ever saw, into the cold ancient dark, where the oldest families kept the things they did not trust to daylight. The vault of House Black opened to the heir's blood, Harry's palm against the door, the gold reading him, the great stone grinding back, and what lay inside it was not mostly gold, though there was gold. It was 900 years of a family that had never once thrown anything away. Hermione walked into it the way she walked into any library, which was as though she had come home and had a great deal of cataloging to do. Harry walked into it more slowly, because it was his inheritance in a way it could never quite be hers, and the weight of that settled onto a boy who had spent his first year of life in a cupboard, and was now standing in a room that held the accumulated proof that he came from somewhere vast and old and his. "It's a lot," he said. "It's everything they were." Regulus moved through the vault with the ease of a man who had played in it as a child. The good and the rotten, all of it never sorted, because sorting would mean judging, and the family preferred to hoard its sins alongside its glories and call the whole pile heritage. He touched a suit of goblin-made armor, a case of wands taken from defeated enemies, a shelf of grimoires that made even Hermione step back. "Your job, both of you, is to be the first Blacks in 3 centuries who actually sort it. Keep what's worth keeping. Bury what should never see daylight. That's what restoring a house means, not loving everything it was, choosing what it's going to be." It was Hermione who found the thing the old goblin had wanted them to find, because of course it was. She had been moving along the ledgers, the vault kept its own records, a running account in the family's own hand of everything added and removed, and she stopped and went still in the way she only did when a fact had refused to fit, and said, "Someone's been in here, recently." 4 times in 12 years, exactly as he said. She ran her finger down the ledger. "But they didn't take anything. Look, every visit logged, and every visit the same, nothing removed, nothing added. They came down here 4 times in 12 years to stand in a dead family's vault and take nothing." She looked up. Why would someone with a key to the richest vault in Britain come 4 times and steal nothing? Because they weren't after the gold. Regulus came to read over her shoulder, and the cold in his chest ached the way it did when a thread pulled taut. They were after information, or access, or proof that the vault was still sealed, still untouched, still waiting. Someone has been checking every few years that the House of Black stayed dead. His voice dropped. There's exactly one man in Britain who'd install himself as trustee over a dead family's fortune and never touch a nut of it. A man who doesn't want money, who has never wanted money, who wants only to know where the pieces on his board are and whether any of them have moved. He straightened. Dumbledore. He's been watching this vault for 12 years the way he's been watching the wards in Surrey. He suspected someone had taken the boy. He couldn't find who. So he sat on the family's gold like a man watching a trap, waiting for the Guardian to need it, to come for it, to surface, and the Guardian never did, because the Guardian had a vault of his own and didn't need a dead house's coin. Regulus almost smiled, cold and grim. He's been fishing for me in this vault for 12 years with the family fortune as bait. And I never bit because I never needed it, and the not biting told him more than biting would have. It told him whoever took the boy was a black in truth, not a thief in a dead man's name. Harry was looking at the ledger, at the 4 cold entries, at the patient decade-long surveillance written in a banker's neutral hand. He never stops, does he? He's been playing this the whole time. Even the parts where nothing happened, he was still playing. That's what makes him dangerous. Not the power, there are more powerful wizards, the patience. He'll wait 12 years to confirm a suspicion and call it a Tuesday. Regulus closed the ledger. Which is why we don't petition for the trustee's name yet. The old goblin was right. The moment we ask, Dumbledore knows we've found his fishing line, and I'd rather he didn't know what we know until I've decided what to do with it. We let him keep believing his trap might still spring. We take what we came for and we leave his line in the water, and we go to war with him over the boy's life on a battlefield I choose, not this one. He looked at the two of them, small and solemn in the vast cold vault of their inheritance. Take something, both of you, not gold, something that means the house is yours now. The vault should know its heirs have come, and so should you. Hermione chose a book, inevitably, a slim cracked volume on the deep family rights, the oldest soul magic the Blacks had ever set down, which she did not yet know would become, 3 years on, the thing that saved her brother's life. Harry chose the wooden snake, which creature had returned to the vault for safekeeping years ago, and which Harry had not seen since he was small, and which he had handed to a girl across a gap when he was 2 and she was 3. And which was, of everything in 900 years of accumulated black grandeur, the only thing in the vault he actually wanted. Sentiment, Regulus observed, watching the boy pocket a child's toy in a room full of treasure. Faith, Harry corrected. Always faithful, you said. The snake's the first thing that was ever mine and hers both. That makes it worth more than the armor. And Regulus, who had spent 12 years teaching the boy that the creed was about loyalty and not blood or gold, found he had nothing at all to add to that, and led his heirs back up out of the dark toward the daylight where the war was waiting. Lucius Malfoy received the news of the Black Heirs on a gray afternoon in his study, from a man whose continued employment depended on bringing him exactly this kind of news, and he did not throw anything, because Lucius Malfoy had not thrown anything since he was 19, and had learned that composure was the most expensive thing a man could wear and therefore the most worth wearing. He read the report twice. 2 heirs. The House of Black, which he had quietly regarded as a dead asset he was slowly digesting, its Wisengamot vote his to cast, its prestige his to borrow through Narcissa, its eventual extinction a matter of waiting out a man in Azkaban, had produced, overnight and from nowhere, 2 confirmed heirs with the full armor of the family magic behind them. The vote he had voted for 12 years was about to be frozen. The asset he had been digesting had teeth. Who performed the rite? He asked the room. The room had no answer. That was the thing that troubled him, more than the vote, more than the prestige. An heir right of an ancient house required the house signet and someone with the standing to wield it, and everyone with that standing was dead or imprisoned. Sirius could not have done it from a cell. Regulus was 12 years dead. Bellatrix, his wife's sister, was in the cell next to Sirius's and could not have organized a tea party. And yet someone had stood in a ritual room with the black ring and bound 2 children to the house so thoroughly that the goblins, Lucius's contacts in the bank were expensive and reliable, had called the adopted girl equal to the blood, which had not happened in 3 centuries. Someone of the house was alive who should not be. Lucius did not know who, and the not knowing was a splinter, and Lucius Malfoy had built his entire life on never having splinters he could not eventually remove. He went to find his wife. Narcissa was in the conservatory, and she had already heard. She heard most things before Lucius did and let him believe otherwise because it pleased him and cost her nothing. She was a black by birth, and she looked at the report he set before her with an expression he had spent 20 years failing to read. 2 heirs, she said, a boy of the blood and a girl who isn't, and the family magic took the girl as its own. Her pale finger touched the second name, Hermione. That's not a family name. The Blacks name their daughters for stars and flowers. Whoever did this didn't care about the old forms, they cared about the girl. She looked up at her husband, and for the first time in the conversation something moved behind her eyes that was not calculation. Lucius, the House of Black was my house before it was an asset on your ledger. I watched it die, my aunt screaming herself into the grave, my cousins scattered or imprisoned, the name a tombstone. And now someone has spent 12 years in the dark restoring it quietly, completely, raising 2 children to carry it, and they did it without asking the ministry's permission or yours or mine. She set the report down. I'm not certain that's a threat. I'm not certain it's an ally either. But I'd be a fool to treat the resurrection of my own house as a problem to be managed before I've understood it, and so would you. It freezes our vote. It freezes a vote that was never ours, that you've been quietly stealing for 12 years, and that someone has just quietly stopped stealing. Narcissa's voice did not rise, it never rose. Tread carefully, husband. Whoever raised those children outplayed you for over a decade while you didn't even know there was a game. A man who can do that is not a man you move against until you know what he wants. I'd very much like to know what he wants. She turned back to her flowers. And I'd very much like to meet the children. A black daughter who isn't of the blood, taken as equal by the gold. I haven't been surprised by my own family in 30 years. I find I've missed it. And in Scotland, an old man in a high tower lit a lamp he kept for the rare nights when the long game moved a piece he had not moved himself, and read the lineage report his own quiet sources had brought him, and understood that the boy he had shelved 10 years ago in a Surrey cupboard had not been waiting on the shelf at all. Albus Dumbledore had known the boy was gone since the night the wards opened. He had spent 10 years watching for the shape of the hole, as he'd promised the dark he would, and the boy had simply never surfaced, no underage magic logged, no sightings, no ripple, as though someone had taken the most famous child in Britain and folded him so completely out of the world that even Albus's instruments lost the scent. He had not been idle. He had visited the Black Vault 4 times over the years. Under the trusteeship he'd quietly arranged the moment he understood a Black had taken the boy, hoping the family's fortune might draw the hidden guardian into the open. It never had. Whoever held the boy did not need the gold, which told Albus the guardian was a Black in truth and not a thief in a dead man's name, and which had narrowed his guesses to a very short and very impossible list. Now the whole had a shape to it. The boy and a second child, a girl, adopted, bound to the house as deeply as the blood. The guardian had not merely hidden Harry. The guardian had raised him, trained him, given him a sister and a name and the full inheritance of an ancient house, and had now, deliberately, on a date of the guardian's own choosing, walked the boy out into the daylight as the heir of Black. This was not a kidnapping. This was a countermove executed by someone who had understood, perhaps better than Albus himself, exactly what Albus had intended to do with the boy and had decided, 12 years ago, to make it impossible. "I've made him into something I can't simply collect," Albus said softly to the lamp, and there was in his ancient voice something that in a younger man would have been fear and in him was closer to grief, the grief of a man who has carried a terrible necessary plan alone for a decade and just discovered that someone has quietly dismantled its foundations while he slept. The prophecy still stood. The peace of the Dark Lord that he believed lodged in the boy still had to be reckoned with one terrible day. But the boy was no longer a pawn he could move at the proper time. The boy was an heir, armored in old law and old magic, and Albus suspected old loyalty, and the day was coming when Albus would have to sit across a table from whoever had built him and explain why the boy he'd raised had to be prepared to die. He did not look forward to that conversation. He had the strong and unwelcome feeling that the person on the other side of the table would have been preparing for it for 12 years. There was one piece of the inheritance that could not be claimed, and Regulus made himself tell them about it the night after Gringotts, because a thing avoided becomes a thing that festers. "You keep hearing me say the lordship is serious," he said. "I want you to understand what that means and what it costs and what we're eventually going to do about it, because it's the one piece of this house neither of you can simply take." He sat heavily. The day had tired him, as days increasingly did. "My brother is the Lord of House Black, not me. I'm dead, remember, and a dead man holds nothing. Not you, your heirs, and heirs wait. Sirius, who is in Azkaban serving a life sentence for betraying the Potters to their deaths and murdering 13 people in a street. That's the story. That's what the world believes and what the ministry recorded and why the ring in that casket answers to a man rotting on a rock in the sea." "You don't believe the story," Hermione said. She had heard it in how he said it, the flat distance he kept from the official version. "I don't believe the story, and I've never believed it, and the reason is arithmetic." Regulus laid it out the way he laid out everything. Sirius loved James Potter more than he loved his own family, chose him over us, walked out of this house for him, would have died for him a dozen times over. A man does not spend his whole boyhood choosing his friend over his blood and then sell that friend to the Dark Lord. The loyalty doesn't add up, and when a thing doesn't add up, someone has arranged for it not to. Someone else betrayed the Potters and let my brother take the fall, and the ministry was too frightened and too eager to want a villain to check the sum. He looked at his hands. "I've known for years, and I've done nothing because doing something meant surfacing, and surfacing meant losing the 2 of you to a state that would have handed you to Dumbledore. I left my brother in a cell to keep my children safe. It's the coldest thing I've ever done, and I did the cave, so understand what I mean when I say it's the coldest." The room was quiet. Harry was the one who broke it, because Harry always went to the wound directly. "Then we get him out when we can, when it's safe. Yes, Regulus met the boy's eyes. Not yet, we're not strong enough yet, and a failed attempt to free a convicted traitor would undo everything we've built this week. But you're heirs of an ancient house now, with the goblin's respect and a frozen Wisengamot seat and the leverage that comes with both, and leverage is the thing I never had as a hidden man. One day, when you're strong enough that the ministry can't simply ignore you, we find the truth and we prove it, and we walk my brother out of that cell. And when we do, something moved in his ruined voice that the cave had never quite managed to kill. When we do, the lordship will be his, freely held, and he can do with it what he likes, including give it to the two of you, which I suspect is exactly what he'll do, because Sirius never wanted to rule anything. He only ever wanted to be free and to be loved by the people he chose. I'd like him to have both before I'm done. I owe him that. I owe him 12 years in a cell I could have spared him and chose not to. Hermione, who missed nothing, heard the thing under the words. You feel guilty about leaving him there. Every day. Regulus did not soften it. And I'd do it again because the sum still comes out the same, his freedom against your safety, and you win. You'll always win. That's what loving you cost the rest of the world. But guilt isn't the opposite of a right choice. Sometimes the right choice and the guilty one are the same choice, and a man who tells you otherwise is selling you a comfort that doesn't exist. He stood slow. I'm telling you all of this so that when the day comes, and it will come, you understand it isn't charity we're doing for a stranger. It's a debt. The House of Black left one of its own in the dark to save two others, and a house that means always faithful doesn't get to leave a debt like that unpaid. Sirius is the proof of whether we mean the creed or just say it. One day you'll free him. Consider it the first real test of everything I've taught you, and the one I'll be proudest to see you pass. That night in the shuttered London house, Harry found Hermione awake at the window, looking out at the wizarding street they had only ever seen in the dark, and he came and stood beside her, and for a while neither of them said anything, which between them was its own kind of conversation. It said yes, she said finally. She had said it the night of the rite, and she said it again now, and Harry understood that she would probably say it in her own head for the rest of her life. I always thought if anyone ever looked closely enough all the way down, they'd find out I wasn't really anything, that I was a mistake the world made and could unmake, and the oldest magic in your family looked all the way down, and it said yes. She turned from the window. You vouched for me, in the dark. Before I could even, you just put your hand over mine and told the house I was yours. You are, Harry said. It was the simplest thing in the world to him, and he said it that way. You've been mine since I was 2, and you handed me the wood snake. The house just took 12 years to catch up. She looked at him for a moment too long, and he looked back, and the thing that had been growing in the space between were better together, and whatever it would become moved in the dark like the wards waking. And then, because they were 11 and 12 and Regulus had built them too well to be reckless with the one irreplaceable thing they had, they both stepped back from the edge of it at the same instant, by the same unspoken agreement, the way they did everything. We have a house to restore, Hermione said, and her voice was steady, and only he would have heard what it cost to make it steady. We have a house to restore, Harry agreed, and turned back to the window, and they stood there shoulder to shoulder, two heirs of an ancient and most noble house that the world had written off as dead and would shortly have to write back into all its ledgers in unburnable gold. And below them the wizarding world slept, not yet knowing that it had been quietly, completely outmaneuvered by a dead man and the 2 children he loved. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5. The world notices the Hogwarts letters arrived together, addressed in green ink to 2 children who had never been to school in their lives, and Regulus knew the moment Creature set them on the breakfast table that they were not letters at all, but the opening of a door someone in Scotland had been waiting 12 years to walk through. He knows where we are, Harry said. He turned his letter over. The address was exact, not Surrey, not a guess, but the shuttered London house, the precise room they ate in. He addressed it to the right house. He's telling us he knows. He's telling us he can reach us, which is a different and more interesting message. Regulus did not touch his coffee. Hogwarts sends letters to every magical child in Britain. The quill does it automatically. It doesn't require Dumbledore to lift a finger. But the quill addresses a child wherever the child's magic lives, and a child raised behind the Hollows wards should have been invisible to it. You 2 became visible the night of the rite. The letters found you because you let the world find you. That's not Dumbledore's doing. He picked up Hermione's letter and read the address again. What's Dumbledore's doing is that this letter came by owl 3 days after the registry logged you, when a normal first-year's letter comes in the summer of their 11th year and you're both past that. He's used the ordinary machine to send an extraordinary message. The message is, I see you, I have a legitimate reason to make contact, and I would like to do it on my ground. Hermione had her letter open and was reading the list of required books with the helpless hunger of a girl who had been taught by one tutor her whole life and had just been handed a door into a library the size of a castle. I want to go, she said, and then, because she was honest, I know I shouldn't say that first. I know it's a hook. I can see it's a hook. I want to go anyway. Of course you do. It's an extraordinarily good hook, baited with the one thing you can't resist, which is more to learn. Regulus almost smiled. That's what makes Albus Dumbledore dangerous and not merely powerful. He doesn't bait traps with things you fear. He baits them with things you want, things it would be reasonable to want, things a good person would feel small for refusing. A castle full of knowledge for you. For Harry, he looked at the boy. A hall full of people who'd cheer his name, a place to belong, the ordinary boyhood the cupboard stole. He's not wrong that you'd both flourish there. He's just also planning to use the years to make Harry into what the war needs Harry to be, and he'd do it kindly, and that's worse, not better. So we don't go, Harry said. I didn't say that. Regulus set the letter down. We don't go yet, and we don't go on his terms, and we don't go as two grateful children walking into the headmaster's parlor. If you go to that castle, you go as the heirs of Black, on a footing I've negotiated with the right to leave. But before any of that, I'm going to do the thing he's actually asking for, which is meet him, because the letters aren't really about school. They're about getting me to the table. He's worked out that someone raised you. He wants to look that someone in the eye. He stood. So I'll let him, on my ground, not his. It's time Albus Dumbledore and I had the conversation we've both been preparing for since the night I walked through his wards. They met in a Muggle churchyard on the edge of Godric's Hollow, which was Regulus's choice and his message, because it was the village where the Potters had died and the boy had lived, and Regulus wanted the old man standing on that ground when they spoke. Dumbledore came alone, which Regulus had required and had, frankly, expected. The old man's vanity was of the specific kind that believed itself equal to any room. He was older than the photographs, silver and stooped and bright-eyed, and he stopped a careful 10 paces off among the leaning stones and looked at the hooded man waiting for him with an expression of frank, almost delighted curiosity. I confess, Dumbledore said, I have run through a great many names these 12 years and discarded every one as impossible. A Black, certainly, the wards were quite clear on that, but the Blacks are accounted for. The dead, the imprisoned, the married away. I could not make the arithmetic work, he tilted his head, and yet here you are and you've chosen this village, which tells me you want me to know that you know what happened here. So, will you show me your face, or shall I simply enjoy the puzzle a little longer? Regulus lowered his hood. He watched it land. He had wondered in the long years of preparing for this whether the old man's composure was real or worn, and he had his answer in the half-second before Dumbledore mastered himself. It was worn and beautifully, but it was worn, and underneath it the news that Regulus Black was alive went through Albus Dumbledore like a stone through still water. Regulus, Dumbledore breathed, you died in 79. I let everyone believe I died in 79. It's a useful thing to be a dead man. No one looks for you. Regulus did not move closer and did not relax. I know what you did here, Albus. I know you came to this village and found a dead family and a living boy, and I know you took the boy to his mother's sister and locked him behind blood wards and walked away, and I know why, which is the part you've never told anyone, including your own order. You took him because of the prophecy. And you locked him away unloved and untrained not because it was safe, but because you needed him kept until he was ripe, and a boy who is loved and trained and powerful is a boy who might refuse you when the time comes. You wanted him grateful and biddable and a little broken. You wanted a weapon that thought it was a volunteer. The churchyard was very quiet. A late bee worked the wildflowers among the stones. You believe you understand my intentions, Dumbledore said at last, and there was no anger in it, only a terrible tiredness. Let me grant you a great deal and tell you that you understand perhaps half of them, and that the half you've missed is the half that has kept me from sleeping for 12 years. He leaned on a tilted gravestone. There is a prophecy, yes. It names the boy as the one with the power to end the Dark Lord, and it says that neither can live while the other survives. You've clearly deduced most of it, but you have not deduced, or perhaps you have. You were always the cleverest of that whole black brood, the part that makes the prophecy a tragedy rather than a hope. His blue eyes fixed on Regulus. The night the Dark Lord's curse rebounded in that house, a piece of him did not die. It found the nearest living thing, and it lodged there in the boy behind that scar. Harry Potter is not only the one who can end Voldemort. He is himself the last and unintended vessel of the very thing he must destroy, and the only way I have ever been able to see in 12 years of looking for the Dark Lord to truly die is for the boy to die first, Regulus finished, and his voice was the cold of the cave, flat and final, so that the fragment in him dies with him. He had known. He had suspected since the night he first laid his palm over the warm scar, had been all but certain since he'd matched the boy's warm mark to his own cold one, had built 12 years of contingency around the possibility. But there was a difference between suspecting a thing in the privacy of your own dread and hearing it spoken aloud by the one man in Britain with the standing to make it policy, and the difference went through Regulus like the locket's death had, and he let none of it reach his face. You've spent 12 years preparing a child to walk to his own slaughter, Regulus said, and you've told yourself it's mercy because you intend to be kind about it. I know the feeling, Albus. I took a mark once, telling myself the cause was clean. Let me tell you what I learned in a cave full of the dead. He took one step closer, and for the first time the old man's eyes sharpened with something like wariness. The fragment can be removed without killing the host. I've done it. Not from a boy, from a locket, the Dark Lord's locket, which I took from a cave you don't know about and destroyed with my own hands 12 years ago, which is why there's one fewer piece of him in the world than you've been losing sleep over. I know what these things are. I know how they're anchored and I know how they're cut loose, and I have spent 12 years learning how it might be done to a living vessel without the vessel dying, because I looked at that boy when he was 15 months old, and I decided that the world that wanted him dead was going to have to come through me, and it has been 12 years and no one has managed it yet, including you. Dumbledore was silent for a long moment, and when he spoke his voice had changed. The benevolence had not gone, but something under it had come awake, the thing that had made him the only wizard the Dark Lord ever feared. You destroyed one of them, you're certain. I'm certain, I have the cold to prove it. Regulus did not elaborate. There are more. There's a diary in Lucius Malfoy's keeping, or there was. There are others I've mapped and can't reach. The boy is one. And you and I, Albus, are the only two people alive who understand the actual shape of this war, and we want different endings. You want the boy spent cleanly when the time comes, and I want every other piece destroyed first so that when the time comes the boy is the last problem and not the first sacrifice. We are not allies. But we are the only two players who can see the whole board, and there's a thing coming that's going to make us cooperate whether we like it or not, because the Dark Lord is not gone, he's misplaced, and misplaced things come back. You would have me believe, Dumbledore said slowly, that you raised Lily James's son not to use him, but to save him. I raised him because someone left him on a doorstep in the cold, and I had a cold of my own and I couldn't walk past it. Regulus pulled his hood back up. Believe whatever lets you sleep. Here are the terms. The boy and the girl are heirs of Black, and they are mine, and you do not move on them, you do not collect them, you do not so much as send them a sherbet lemon without my knowing. In exchange, when the day comes that the Dark Lord is back and the Horcruxes have to be hunted, I'll bring you what I've mapped, because I'm one man and you have an order, and the work is bigger than my pride. That's the deal. You get the war you can't win without me. I get to keep my children alive on my terms. He turned to go and stopped and delivered the last of it over his shoulder in the flat voice of the cave. And Albus, if you ever decide that the clean thing is to spend the boy after all, understand that you'll be deciding it against a man who has already died once to keep a piece of that monster's soul out of the world, and who has nothing left to lose but 2 children, and who will burn down everything you've ever built to keep them. Tauger's purr, look it up, it doesn't mean what you think. He left the old man standing among the graves of Godric's Hollow, and Albus Dumbledore watched him go and understood, with the particular clarity of a man who has just met the one person in the world who has outthought him, that the long game he had played alone for 12 years now had a second player at the board, and that the second player loved the very piece Albus had planned to sacrifice, and that this changed everything and might, just possibly, change it for the better. And that he was far too old and had carried the secret far too long to be sure. He came home from Godric's Hollow and told them everything, because he had decided years ago that the day he confirmed the worst was the day he stopped protecting them with ignorance and started protecting them with truth. He sat them down at the table in the shuttered house, and he laid out the war the way he'd laid out the chessboard, except that this map was drawn in soul fragments, and he had been the only living person to hold a piece of it in his hands. He told them about the Horcruxes, the word, the architecture of it, the way a man could tear his soul and hide the pieces so that killing his body changed nothing. He told them about the cave and the locket and the cold in his chest, in flat, plain sentences with nothing of the cave's horror left in them, because they were old enough now to be told and too clever to be told gently. He told them about the diary in Malfoy's keeping and the others he'd mapped and never reached, and then he told Harry the thing he'd carried alone for 12 years. There's a piece of him in your scar, he said. He did not soften it. Softening it would have insulted the boy. I've known since the night I took you out of Surrey. Your scar is warm and it should be cold, the way my chest is cold and should be warm, 2 marks left by the same torn soul. Dumbledore knows it too. He confirmed it today in a churchyard standing on the ground where your parents died, and he told me the only ending he can see for this war. Regulus met his son's eyes. He thinks you have to die. He thinks the piece in you can only be destroyed by destroying you, and he spent 12 years preparing you, or trying to before I took you, to be willing to do it when the time comes. That's the clean answer. That's the answer the cleverest wizard in Britain has been losing sleep over for 12 years. Harry did not look away. He had been raised by a man who'd walked out of a lake of the dead, and he had learned from him that the only thing to do with a terrible fact was to look at it squarely. And what's your answer? That the cleverest wizard in Britain is wrong because he's been thinking about how to win the war and I've been thinking about how to save my son, and those produce different mathematics. Regulus laid his cold-marked hand flat on the table. I destroyed a Horcrux and lived. The vessel was metal, not flesh, and that makes the problem harder, not impossible. For 12 years, between hiding you and raising you, I have been learning exactly how a soul fragment anchors itself to a living host, and exactly how it might be cut loose without cutting loose the host. I don't have the whole of it yet, but I have more of it than any person who has ever lived because no one else has ever wanted to solve this particular problem. Everyone else who's ever held a Horcrux just wanted to destroy it, and the vessel be damned. I want the vessel. I've always wanted the vessel. The vessel handed me a wood snake when he was 2. He looked between them. Here is what I need you both to understand and to never forget, no matter who tells you otherwise in the years coming. The fact that there's a piece of him in you does not make you his. It makes you the prison he's trapped in. You're not the monster's vessel, Harry. You're the monster's cage, and one day we're going to open the cage from the outside and let nothing out but you. Hermione had been silent the whole time, which from her meant she was working, and when she spoke, it was not fear, it was the beginning of a plan, because that was how she loved. Then I want every book you have on soul magic, she said. All of it, the cave, the locket, everything you've learned in 12 years, everything you haven't cracked yet. You've been solving this alone, you don't have to anymore. She set her jaw. There are 3 of us now. And I'm the one who finds the thing in the book that everyone else read past. If there's a way to cut the fragment loose without losing him, I'm going to be the one who finds the last piece of it, and I'm going to start tonight. Regulus looked at his daughter, the girl the world had erased, offering to spend herself on the problem of saving the boy the world wanted dead, and he understood that he had, without quite meaning to, raised the 2 people who together might actually solve the thing he'd only ever been able to chip at alone. Then we stop hiding the problem and start working it, he said. All 3 of us. The diary first. When we can reach it, destroying a Horcrux we can hold teaches us about the one we can't cut. Pieces next, and the boy last, when we understand it well enough to be sure. He stood. Dumbledore wants to spend you at the end of a war. We're going to make sure that by the time the end of the war comes, there's nothing left in you to spend. The first society outing was a Wizengamot session, and Harry and Hermione walked into it as heirs of Black, and the chamber learned in the space of an afternoon that the dead house had come back with teeth. They were not there to vote. Heirs could not vote. They were there to petition Hermione's petition, drafted in her relentless hand, to suspend the Malfoy proxy on the Black seat, and they were there, more importantly, to be seen, because Regulus had taught them that the first impression a resurrected house made would echo for a decade. So they came in formal black robes, and they did not whisper, and they did not gawp at the carved chamber and its tiers of plum-robed elders, and when the heads turned to track the 2 unknown children walking the central aisle, Harry and Hermione walked it the way Regulus had drilled into them on the worn training ground Earth, unhurried, untouchable, 2 young people who had been told their whole lives that they were the future of an ancient house, and had come to believe it in their bones. Lucius Malfoy was waiting, of course. He rose from the Malfoy seat with the easy grace of a man who had never lost a chamber in his life, silver-haired and silk-voiced, and he addressed the assembly rather than the children, which was its own small contempt. I must question, he said, whether 2 children, however charmingly turned out, can truly be what the registry claims. The House of Black is a tragedy we have all mourned. To see its name worn by, forgive me, a boy no one can account for and a girl whose lineage appears nowhere before 3 years of age strains the credulity of this body. Airship is not a costume. I would ask the petitioners to explain before this chamber exactly who raised them and by what authority the black signet was used. It was a good attack. It was the attack Regulus had predicted to the word, and so Hermione had her answer ready, and she did not give it to the chamber. She gave it to Lucius directly in the clear carrying voice of a girl who had argued points of inheritance law across the dinner table since she was 8. Lord Malfoy asks by what authority the signet was used, she said. The answer is in the statute of ancient houses, which Lord Malfoy has read, because Lord Malfoy has voted our house's seat by proxy for 12 years under a clause of that same statute, and cannot have failed to read the clause directly above it. The family magic recognizes heirs. The ministry's own deep registry confirms the recognition. The signet answers only true blood and true binding. It cannot be costumed, as Lord Malfoy knows, having held a signet of his own. If Lord Malfoy believes the registry is in error, the remedy is not to question 2 children in open chamber. The remedy is to petition the goblins of Gringotts to re-examine the gold, which has already examined us and found us owed. She let that land, and then she delivered the thing Regulus had told her to hold until exactly this moment. Unless Lord Malfoy would prefer not to invite the goblins to examine the administration of the Black estate too closely, I understand the gold remembers every hand that's touched it. The chamber, which had been enjoying Lucius's performance, went very still and then began, in the way of all such bodies, to murmur. Lucius Malfoy did not flinch. He had not flinched at anything since he was 19, but he sat down, and the sitting was an answer, and everyone in the carved chamber understood that the Silver Lord had probed the resurrected house for a soft place and found instead a girl of 12 who had just suggested, in flawless legal form and in front of the entire Wizengamot, that an audit of the Black vaults might be more embarrassing to him than to her. The proxy was suspended pending review. It was not a total victory. The seat was frozen, not one, exactly as Hermione had predicted months ago at the dinner table, but it was a public one, and the children walked back up the central aisle to a chamber that now watched them with something a great deal warmer than skepticism. A woman intercepted them in the antechamber. She was pale and elegant and unmistakably of the blood. Harry saw the black in her bones before Hermione murmured the name, and she looked at the two of them with an expression that held no hostility and no warmth, only a fierce and genuine curiosity. "Narcissa Malfoy," she said, "born Black, which makes me, by the reckoning your guardian seems to take seriously, something like your cousin." Her pale eyes moved to Hermione. "You handled my husband better than anyone has in 20 years, and you did it without raising your voice, which is the only way it's ever worth doing. I find I want to know who taught you that." She did not wait for an answer she knew she wouldn't get. "I won't ask who raised you. I can see you've been drilled not to say, and I respect a well-kept secret. I've kept a few. But I'll tell you something, cousins, for nothing, because the House of Black was mine before it was a name on anyone's ledger, and I've watched it lie in its grave for a very long time." She lowered her voice. "There are people, old friends of my sister's, men who wore a certain mark, who are very interested in the news that the Blacks have risen. Some of them are interested because the Black name still means something to the cause they served. And some of them are interested because they think a resurrected ancient house would make a useful banner, and they don't much care whether the heirs would consent to be a banner or would have to be made into one. Be careful whose attention you've drawn. Not all of it is as harmless as my husband's." She inclined her head every inch the great lady. "Welcome back to the world. Do call. I make a point of knowing my family, and I find I've a great deal of catching up to do." The prophet gave them the front page, as Regulus had known it would, and the wizarding world fell on the story of the resurrected house with the appetite of a country that had been bored for a decade. "Heirs of Black rise from a dead house," the headline ran, over a sketch some courtroom artist had made of two solemn children in dark robes walking a Wisengamot aisle. The story underneath got nearly everything wrong. It had Harry as a foundling and Hermione as a foreign princess, and their guardian as everything from a reclusive uncle to Gringotts conspiracy, and it got the one thing right that mattered, which was that the House of Black was alive again and had teeth, and that a girl of 12 had frozen Lucius Malfoy's proxy in open chamber without raising her voice. Owls began arriving at the London house within a day. Invitations, overtures, marriage feelers from families who had not deigned to notice the Blacks in 20 years, a careful note from a cousin married into the Tonks line, and 3 separate letters in green ink from a castle in Scotland. "They want us," Harry said, sorting the pile with mild astonishment. "All these people who'd have stepped over us in the street a month ago. We did one thing in one room, and now half of magical Britain wants to be our friend." "They want the house," Regulus corrected. "Which is the same thing now, and you'd both better get used to the conflation, because the rest of your lives will be spent being wanted for what you stand for by people who couldn't pick you out of a crowd. Some of the wanting is harmless. Some of it is Lucius Malfoy deciding that if he can't beat you, he'll marry one of you to a Malfoy and absorb you. All of it is to be answered slowly, politely, and from strength." He set aside the green-inked letters, "which leaves Hogwarts." It was the one piece of the new world Hermione could not be cool about, and she did not try. "I want to go," she said, for the second time since the letters first came, and with no more shame than the first. "I know what it is, Dumbledore's ground, Dumbledore's eyes, 100 ways for him to work on Harry where we can't see. I know all that. And there's a 1,000-year library in that castle and teachers who have forgotten more than our one tutor ever knew, and I have spent my whole life being taught by you in a hidden house, and I want just once to learn somewhere that the world hasn't decided I don't exist." Regulus looked at his daughter for a long moment, and then he did the thing he had taught them both to do, which was separate the fear from the cost. "Here's what I'll allow, and the terms aren't negotiable, so hear them before you celebrate. You go when you're ready and not a day before, and you go as the heir of Black, not as a frightened first year, which means you go late and you go on a footing I negotiate directly with the school, the right to leave, the right to study what you choose, no quiet handling, no headmaster's special interest dressed up as pastoral care. You'll have the run of that library on my terms, or you won't set foot in it on his." He turned to Harry. "And you don't go, not at first, I'm sorry, but the boy the whole country is searching for does not walk into the one building in Britain Albus Dumbledore controls completely and put himself under that roof for 10 months of the year. She goes first on our terms, and she brings the castle's library home to both of you, and we see how the old man behaves when he has one of you within reach and learns he still can't touch you." He almost smiled. "Consider it her reconnaissance and your patience, neither of which has ever been your strong suit, Harry, which is exactly why you need the practice." Harry did not love it. Hermione could see he did not love being separated from her even by the walls of a school, even on terms. But he had been raised by the same man, and he ran the same arithmetic, and he came to the same answer because the answer was correct, and they had both been taught to bow to a correct answer over a comfortable one. "She goes first," he agreed. "She reads the whole library and tells me everything, and we find out what he does. And the day it stops being safe, she leaves, terms or no terms, and I come and get her myself if I have to." "The day it stops being safe," Regulus said, "you won't have to come and get her. She'll already be walking out the front gate because I'll have built her to. That's the whole point of the terms. He gathered the green-inked letters and the marriage feelers and the overtures into a single pile to be answered slowly and from strength. Welcome to being wanted, both of you. It's more dangerous than being ignored and far more dangerous than being hunted, because the people who want you smile while they do it. We'll manage it the way we manage everything, carefully together and 3 moves ahead. They went home from the chamber as victors, and Regulus let them have one evening of it before he reminded them what victory cost. You were seen today, he said, over the late supper creature had made into a celebration despite himself. Not suspected, seen. The whole Wisengamot watched 2 children handle Lucius Malfoy and walk out with his proxy frozen. By tomorrow it's in the Prophet. By the end of the week it's in every drawing room in magical Britain, and in places darker than drawing rooms. He set down his fork. Narcissa warned you in the antechamber, and she was right too. There are people who heard today that the House of Black has risen with 2 powerful heirs, and not all of them are clapping. Some of them are doing exactly what we did when we found the diary thread. They're looking at a piece on the board that's suddenly moved, and they're working out how to use it or take it. The cell she mentioned, Hermione said, Bellatrix's old people, among others, but yes, them especially, because they kept the faith through 12 years of the Dark Lord's absence, and the news that a black heir is a black-haired boy of about the right age who appeared from nowhere is going to mean something very specific to people who felt the Master's work the night he fell. Regulus's voice flattened into the cave register. So we stop being a house that defends and start being a house that moves first. We've been on our heels for 12 years, hiding, then surfacing, then proving ourselves, always reacting. That ends now. The world's noticed us. Good. While it's busy noticing, we go on offense on the one front that matters, which is the one no one else even knows is a front. He looked at the 2 of them, the Horcruxes. We've talked about them as a thing that's coming. They're not coming. They're here in the world right now, anchoring a misplaced master who's already beginning to stir. Everyone we destroy makes him weaker and the eventual war shorter, and everyone we destroy teaches us more about the one we can't yet touch. Harry's hand went unconsciously to his scar. The one in me, the one in you, which we will not touch until we understand it well enough to be certain, and the way we get certain is by practicing on the ones we can hold. Regulus laid it out like a campaign. The diary first when we can reach it. It's the nearest, and Narcissa Malfoy has just handed us, without meaning to, the one lever that might pry it loose, a black cousin who's frightened of what her sister's becoming and doesn't want a piece of that creature's soul in her own house. We cultivate her, carefully, cousin to cousin, the way Hermione's already started, then the others I've mapped, one at a time, patiently, the way I do everything. He almost smiled. We have an advantage no one in the history of this war has ever had. The enemy doesn't know we're hunting him. He thinks he's a secret. He has no idea that a dead man and 2 teenagers have a map of his soul and a method for unmaking it. As long as we stay quieter than the noise we're about to make in the Wisengamot, as long as the world watches the heirs play politics and never suspects what the heirs do in the dark, we can take him apart piece by piece before he ever knows the pieces are going missing. In a damp, safe house in the north, a handful of men and 1 woman who wore an old mark on their forearms read the news of the Black heirs, and the woman laughed. She was not Bellatrix. Bellatrix was still on her rock in the sea, and the cell that gathered in the damp house spoke her name the way the devout speak of a saint not yet returned. But she had been Bellatrix's lieutenant in the First War, and she had kept the faith through 12 years of the Dark Lord's absence, and she held the cell together on the strength of a single unshakable conviction, that the Master was not dead, only waiting, and that the faithful would be rewarded when he came back. The House of Black, she said, and tapped the newspaper. Risen 2 heirs, and the boy of the blood is, the whispers say, a black-haired boy of about 11 that no one can account for before 3 years ago. She looked around the circle of hard faces. We all know what black-haired boy of about 11 went missing from the world about 11 years ago. We all know whose curse left a mark on his forehead. The black heir is the Potter brat. Someone took him and dressed him up in a dead house's robes and hid him for a decade, and now they've walked him out into the daylight and they think the law and the gold will keep him safe. Her smile was a terrible thing. The Master made that boy what he is. There's a piece of the Master in that boy. I'd stake my life on it. I felt the Master's work the night it happened. Which means the boy isn't an enemy to be killed. The boy is a relic to be recovered. A piece of the Dark Lord walking around in a child's body, claimed by a house that thinks it owns him. She folded the paper. We don't move yet. We watch. We find out who raised him, because whoever it was outsmarted everyone for 12 years, and that makes them dangerous. And when we know enough, we take the boy and we keep him safe and we keep him whole, against the day the Master comes back to collect what's his. The faithful will not have failed him. We will hand the Master the missing piece of his own soul, gift-wrapped in the robes of House Black, and we will be first among the rewarded. The cell drank to it. Outside, the rain came down on the north, and a piece of the war that the whole country believed was over turned over in its sleep and began slowly to wake. Harry found Hermione on the roof of the London house that night because she went up when she needed the sky, and he always knew when she'd gone up, and he climbed out the attic window and sat beside her on the cold slates without a word. Narcissa was warning us, Hermione said, about the ones who'd make us a banner, the ones who'd make Harry a banner. She had turned it over 100 times since the antechamber. He could hear it in the precision of her voice, the way she got more exact the more frightened she was. Regulus has been telling us for years that the Dark Lord isn't really gone. I always understood it as a fact. Tonight I understood it as a person who wants something, and the thing he wants is you. She didn't look at him. There's a piece of him in your scar. Regulus thinks so. Dumbledore thinks so. I've thought so for a year and didn't say it because saying it made it real. I know, Harry said. He'd known longer than that. The scar had always been warm, and he had always known in the animal way of children that the warmth was not his own. It doesn't change anything. It changes everything. There are people who will come for you. There's an old man who thinks the cleanest answer is for you to. She couldn't say it, and he understood, and he let her not say it. And there's a piece of the worst thing in the world living behind your face, and one day someone's going to have to deal with it, and the way these things usually get dealt with, Hermione. He turned to her on the cold roof, and the city's witchlight caught the side of her face, and he said the thing plainly, because plainness was the only gift he had that she didn't have more of. Regulus took a locket out of a cave that was supposed to be impossible, and he killed the thing inside it, and he didn't die. He spent 12 years learning how to do it to something living without it dying. He didn't learn that for a hobby. He learned it for me. There's exactly one person in the world who looked at a baby with a monster behind his face and decided to spend his whole life figuring out how to get the monster out without losing the baby, and that person raised us, and that person is downstairs right now alive when he was supposed to be dead. I'm not going to die for Albus Dumbledore's clean answer. I'm going to live for Regulus Black's stubborn one, and so are you. We do everything together, remember. She looked at him for a long moment, and the thing between them, the thing that had been growing in the space between were better together and whatever it would become, came right up to the surface and hung there in the cold air, and this time neither of them stepped back from the edge. They simply sat with it, looked at it together, and let it be true without yet saying it, which was its own kind of avowal, and the only kind they could afford with the war waking around them. We do everything together, she agreed, and leaned her shoulder against his, and they sat on the roof of the dead family's house and watched the city, two heirs the whole world had finally noticed, not yet knowing that the noticing had already brought the first of the wolves to the edge of the wood. The strike came 11 days later in the gray hour before dawn, when the cell that had been told to watch and wait disobeyed its lieutenant out of zeal, 3 masked men who had decided that recovering the master's relic was worth more than patience, and who came over the wards of the London house in the dark with the boy's recovery as their prize. They did not know the house had been raised by Regulus Black. They did not know the boy could put a man through a wall. They were about to learn both, and the lesson was going to wake the entire war. Chapter 5 and Chapter 6, reclaiming the legacy, the 3 masked men came over the wards of the London house at the gray hour before dawn, and they had time to understand exactly one thing before it ended, which was that they had been told the wrong story about who lived there. Harry was awake. He was always awake before dawn. The cupboard had taught him that the dangerous hours were the quiet ones, and 12 years of safety had never quite unlearned it. He felt the wards break the way Regulus had taught him to feel them, a wrongness, a cold pressure, the house flinching, and he was on his feet with his wand in his hand before the first man's boots touched the landing. He did not call out. Calling out was what frightened people did, and Harry Black had been built by a man who had drilled the fright out of him on a worn patch of Welsh grass. He woke Hermione through the wall the way only they could, a pulse of warning down the bond the mindwork had built, and he felt her come awake instantly and reach for her own wand, and then he stepped out onto the landing to meet 3 grown men who had come to take him. The first one saw a boy in a nightshirt and made the mistake the whole world kept making. Harry put him through the wall. He did it without overflow. Regulus's years of drilling held even now, especially now, a single banishing charge with the full weight of his power behind it, and not 1 ounce spilled, and the man left the landing backward and took the banister and a section of plaster with him, and did not get up. The other 2 were faster, and they were not children, and they came at him with curses that lit the dark stairwell green and red, but the dark stairwell was Harry's ground, was the house that had woken to his hand in a storm 3 years ago, and the house knew him. He felt it the way he'd felt it that night, the wards leaning toward him, the old black magic offering itself to the blood that had finally come home. He let it in. The stairwell narrowed around the 2 attackers, the steps shifting under the family's magic, and Harry caught the first curse on a shield that should have been beyond a 13-year-old, and answered with a stunner that cracked the man's head against the wall. The 3rd man got past him because Harry was 13 and powerful and not yet perfect, and ran up toward the room where the girl was, and Hermione Black, who had spent 5 years learning every defensive form Regulus knew and inventing 2 he didn't, was waiting at the top of the stairs with her wand level and her voice steady. and she did not put him through a wall because that was Harry's way and not hers. She took his legs out from under him with a precise conjuration of slick ice across the landing, bound him before he stopped sliding, and had her wand at his throat and a question in her mouth before he understood he'd been beaten by a girl in a dressing gown. "Who sent you?" she said. It was not a question. Regulus had taught her that you never asked a captive a question. You stated the thing you already knew and let them fill the silence with the rest. Regulus arrived then, fully dressed because he never slept more than 4 hours, and took in the scene: 2 stunned men, one through a wall, one bound and bleeding under his daughter's wand, and the cold that came off him filled the stairwell colder than the curses had. "You held," he said, to both of them. It was the highest praise he owned. Then he crouched by the bound man, and his voice dropped to the flat lethal register the children had only heard a handful of times, the cave register, the one that had no fear in it because it had used the fear up years ago. "You came for the boy, which means you know what he is or you've been told, so you're not a thief, you're a pilgrim. You came to recover a relic." He pulled the mask off. The face under it was hard and faithful and afraid. "You're Bellatrix's, one of the old cell. You came for the master's missing piece." He let that sit. "Tell me who leads you now and where, and I'll let you wake up in a ministry cell instead of not waking up at all. You have until I finish deciding whether I believe you matter." The man told him. They always told Regulus things. It was the cold, the certainty, the sense that the man asking had already priced your life and found it cheap. He told them about the cell and the lieutenant, and the thing the lieutenant had been planning for a year and the zealots had jumped early and ruined, and then he told them the thing that turned the night from an attack into a war, the thing that made Regulus go very still and made Hermione's wand hand tighten. "You're too late anyway," the man said with the terrible joy of the faithful. "We got her out 3 nights ago. The Dementors didn't even fight us. They know who they serve. Bellatrix is free." And she felt it too when it happened in that house. She felt the master's work in the brat the same as the rest of us. She's coming for the boy herself, and she does not intend to be gentle about recovering what's the master's. Bellatrix Lestrange came out of Azkaban thin and gray and entirely undiminished, which was the horror of her. 12 years on a rock in the cold sea had pared her down to the single thing she had always been, which was devotion sharpened to a blade. She did not gather the cell to plan. She gathered them to be told. She stood in the damp northern safe house, gaunt and bright-eyed and more dangerous than she had ever been, and she laid out the recovery of the master's relic with the clarity of a woman who had spent 12 years with nothing to do but think about her lord's return. "The boy is a piece of him," she said, and her voice held the cracked reverence of a true believer. "I felt it the night the master fell, felt the soul tear, felt a piece of him go into the brat. They think the boy is a prophecy. They're fools. The boy is a reliquary. And some clever traitor has spent 12 years hiding him and dressing him in my own family's robes." Her lip curled. "House Black, my house, worn by a half-drained child and a mud-blood girl the gold somehow blessed. The master would want him recovered, whole, kept safe, returned to him on the day he rises. And whoever raised him," the smile again terrible, "whoever raised him is going to die slowly enough to learn what it costs to steal from the Dark Lord. We don't go to the London house, they'll have moved. We go to where a black hides what he loves. We go to the old places. Find me the family's bolt holes. Find me where the traitor would take the children to ground when he's frightened. And then we burn the traitor out and we take the master's piece home." Her lieutenant, who had held the faith for 12 years and was not entirely pleased to be demoted to hand the instant the mistress returned, hesitated. "We don't know who raised the boy. Whoever it is outsmarted Dumbledore and the ministry both for over a decade. If we move blind, then we move blind and we move now," Bellatrix snapped, "because every day the boy walks free is a day the traitor turns the master's own relic against the master. I have waited 12 years. I will not wait for certainty." She turned to the map of Britain pinned to the damp wall, and her gaunt finger traced westward into the marches of Wales toward the small forgotten properties of an ancient house. "A black runs to old ground. There's a place out there the family kept and never spoke of. I played in its garden as a girl before my aunt stopped speaking to that branch, the Hollow." Her eyes glittered. "Take me to the Hollow." Regulus knew she would find it. That was the cold arithmetic he'd run the moment he heard her name. Bellatrix had black blood and black memory, and the wards of the Hollow that turned away strangers would hesitate before a daughter of the house, exactly as the blood wards in Surrey had parted for him. So he did the thing he had spent 12 years preparing to do and had prayed he would never have to. He chose his ground, and he sent for the one ally he had sworn he would never trust. "We don't run," he told the children in the great hall of the Hollow, with the wards drawn tight and the constellations cold overhead. "Running is what she wants, a chase." The children, frightened and tired and cornered somewhere worse than home. "We stand here. This house woke to your hand, Harry. Its wards are 900 years deep, and they will fight for the blood of the house the way no borrowed safe house ever could. We turn the Hollow into the thing it was built to be, which is a fortress, and we make Bellatrix Lestrange come to us across ground that hates her." He laid out the defenses the way he laid out everything precisely, leaving nothing to courage. "And I've sent word to Dumbledore." Hermione's head came up. "You said you'd never." "I said we were not allies. We're not." But I made him a bargain in a churchyard, the war for our safety, and the war has come to our door, and a one-armed man does not refuse a second sword because he dislikes the man holding it. Regulus's voice was flat. Bellatrix free, with a cell of fanatics hunting a Horcrux, that's not our fight to win alone, and pride that costs you your children is just vanity with a body count. Dumbledore wants the boy alive at least until the end of the war. On the narrow question of keeping Harry breathing tonight, his interests and mine align. I trust the alignment, I don't trust the man. There's a difference, and you'd both better learn to live in it, because the rest of your lives are going to be spent making temporary allies of people who'd spend you given the chance. Harry had been quiet, turning his wand over in his hands. Before she comes, he said, the diary. You said destroying one we can hold teaches us about the one we can't cut. He looked up. If Bellatrix is loose and the war's waking, the diary in Malfoy's house isn't safe to leave, and if we're ever going to get the piece out of me, we need to learn it on something that isn't me first. We should get the diary before she does, tonight if we can. Regulus looked at his son 13 and already thinking past the battle to the war, already braiding the immediate danger into the long problem of his own survival, and felt the particular pride of a man whose child has begun to outstrategize him. Narcissa, Hermione said immediately, catching it. She told us to call. She's a Black. She warned us about the cell. She's frightened of what her sisters become. And the diary's in her house, and she has no love for the thing. Lucius keeps it secret even from her. If anyone can get us the diary without a fight, it's the wife who's just realized her mad sister is free and hunting. She was already moving toward the desk and the parchment. I'll draft it, cousin to cousin. We don't threaten. We offer her a side to be on before her sister chooses it for her. Narcissa Malfoy gave them the diary in a cold dawn meeting in a neutral house, and she did it for reasons that were entirely her own and entirely sufficient. My husband kept it hidden for 12 years because the Dark Lord gave it to him and called it precious, she said, setting the plain black book on the table between them as though it were something dead. He never knew what it was. I never knew what it was. But my sister is free, and my sister called me 3 nights ago, reached me, somehow, the way she always could, and she spoke of recovering the master's pieces, and I looked at the precious thing my husband had been hiding all these years, and I understood, finally, what it was. Her pale face was composed, and her eyes were not. I will not have it in my house. I will not have my son grow up sleeping above a fragment of that creature's soul. And I will not stand with Bellatrix, whatever the cause, whatever the blood. She looked at the 2 children, her cousins, the resurrection of her dead house. You're going to destroy it. Tell me you're going to destroy it. We are, Hermione said, today, and we're going to learn from it how to save Harry because there's a piece in him too, and the same thing that kills the book is going to teach us how to spare the boy. She held Narcissa's eyes. You're choosing the right side, cousin. The side that takes the pieces out and saves what's left. There's room on it for you. There's going to be room on it for a great many people when this is over. They destroyed the diary in the Hollow's ritual room with the venom blade that had killed the locket, and it died the way the locket had died, a scream of light, a column of black radiance, the boy in the book lunging up out of the pages with Tom Riddle's beautiful cruel face, and reaching for them before the basilisk venom found its heart. And Regulus, who had done this once alone in grief and dread, did it this time with his 2 children at his shoulders, all 3 of them watching the fragment come apart, all 3 of them learning Hermione's relentless eyes cataloging every flicker of the soul's unmaking, building in her library the theory that would one day spare her brother. That's 2, Regulus said when the book lay split and silent. The cold mark on his chest had not warmed this time, it had only ached, recognizing kin. 2 pieces of him gone that the world doesn't know about, and now we know the shape of it well enough to begin the real work. He looked at the dead diary. But not tonight. Tonight Bellatrix is coming, and we've taken her master's relic out of her sister's house, and she's going to be very, very angry. The word Regulus sent to Dumbledore was 3 lines long, and it cost him more to write than anything had since the note he'd left in a false locket at the bottom of a lake. Bellatrix is free and hunting the boy. I am making my stand at a place you will find. If you meant the bargain in the churchyard, this is when it comes due. He did not sign it. He did not need to. There was exactly 1 dead man in Britain who could have written it, and the old man would know. Dumbledore's answer came within the hour by a phoenix that simply appeared in the Hollow's great hall in a wash of warmth and fire, and it was shorter still. I meant it. Tell me where and how many you expect and what you need. And so the wariest alliance in Britain became, for one night, a working one, conducted entirely in notes carried by a bird of fire between a man who had planned to sacrifice a boy and a man who had died to save him, both of them setting the great unfinished argument aside because a mad witch was coming, and the boy they argued over had to live through the coming first. The day before the battle, Regulus turned the Hollow into the fortress 900 years of black paranoia had always meant it to be, and he did it with his children because the work was theirs now as much as his. The wards will fight for our blood, but they can't tell strategy from luck, he told them, the 3 of them walking the boundary stones in the gray afternoon. So we give them strategy, Hermione, the killing ground. Bellatrix will come down the valley from the north because that's the only approach the wards will let a black through, and she'll bring her cell behind her. I want the ground between the boundary stones and the house turned into a problem she has to solve under fire. Pits, redirections, terrain that funnels her people into the open where Harry can reach them. You've been transfiguring battlefields in the game for years. Do it for real. She was already mapping it, her eyes moving over the valley the way they moved over a board, and Regulus watched her see it and knew the northern approach was already in her head, a death trap wearing the face of an open field. Harry, you're the hammer, and I need you to understand the discipline of being a hammer, because the temptation when the people you love are in danger is to become the whole battle, and a wizard who tries to be the whole battle loses the parts he can't see. Regulus stopped him at the central stone. Your sister's going to be running the battlefield. Dumbledore's people, when they come, will hold the flanks. Creature will be everywhere and nowhere. Your job is not to win the battle alone. Your job is to be the thing that turns wherever the line is about to break, the reserve of impossible power that arrives where it's needed and not where your heart drags you. Can you do that? Can you hold back the flood until the flood is needed? I held it on the lawn when I was 7, Harry said. I can hold it now. And then, because he had grown into honesty the way his sister had grown into law, but if she points her wand at either of you, I'm going to stop holding it, and you should both know that now, so it isn't a surprise. Regulus looked at his son for a moment and decided not to lie to him about it. I know, I built that into you on purpose, and I won't pretend I didn't, just Harry. The discipline isn't never letting go, it's choosing the moment. Let go for the right reason at the right time and you save us. Let go a moment too early at a feint and you've spent the flood and there's nothing left when it's real. He gripped the boy's shoulder. Trust your sister to tell you when. She'll see the moment before you feel it. She always has. That night, the last quiet one, the three of them and Creature ate together in the great hall under the cold constellations, and no one spoke much because there was nothing useful left to say, and they were not a family that wasted words on the obvious. Afterward, when Regulus had gone to rest the chest that tired so easily now, and Creature had gone toward the kitchen door for the 9th time, Harry and Hermione sat together in the dark hall with the family's dead burning overhead. They did not talk about what might happen. They went over the plan instead, one more time, the way they had gone over 1,000 games, her seeing the board, him seeing the people on it, the two of them fitting their halves of the coming fight together until there were no seams left to worry. It was the only comfort either of them had ever trusted, not reassurance, but preparation, the certainty that whatever came down the valley would meet two people who had never once faced anything apart. When at last they rose to take their separate posts for the night, it was without a word, because the plan was set and words were unnecessary, and a house of black awake and armed and full of the living waited for the war to come down the valley. She came at midnight across ground that hated her, and the hollow fought for the blood of the house exactly as Regulus had promised. Bellatrix brought 11. The wards of the hollow took 3 of them before they reached the house, old black magic that recognized the daughter and let her pass, but had no such mercy for the strangers she'd brought. Ground that opened, wood that closed, the valley itself rising against trespass 900 years deep. But Bellatrix was a daughter of the house, and the house could not refuse her, and she walked through her own family's defenses with her thin arms spread and her cracked voice raised in something between a war cry and a hymn, and behind her 8 Death Eaters poured toward the lit windows of the hollow. What met them was not a frightened family. What met them was a fortress with 3 defenders who had been preparing for this night for 12 years, and a 4th who arrived in fire. Harry Black came out the front door and did not hold back, because Regulus had told him once on the worn grass that there would come a day when the rule was the opposite of every rule he'd been taught, a day when the lesson was not control but release, when the world needed to see exactly how much power he had, and this was that day. He stopped holding the overflow. He let it all the way out, and the night came apart around him. Curses scattered off shields that blazed like the family's stars, attackers thrown back the way the first man had gone through the wall, the raw, appalling power of him filling the valley until the Death Eaters who had come expecting a child found themselves facing the strongest wizard any of them had ever fought, and he was 13, and he was furious, and the house was singing in his blood. Hermione fought beside him and made him better, the way she always had. Where his power was a flood, she was the banks of the river, calling the shots he couldn't see, taking the legs out from under the ones who flanked him, conjuring and transfiguring the battlefield itself into a thing that served them. They fought as one creature, as the right had made them, as 12 years of doing everything together had built them, and the cell that had come to recover a relic learned that the relic had teeth and a sister and a house that loved him. Regulus fought like the cold thing the cave had made him, economical, lethal, no wasted motion, dropping men with the flat efficiency of someone who had stopped fearing death so long ago that it had become a tool. Creature fought beside his master with the ancient terrible magic of a house elf defending the young of his house, popping in and out of the battle, breaking knees and snapping wands and shrieking the names of the black dead. And then Bellatrix reached the center of it and saw the boy and stopped. There you are, she breathed. The battle raged around her and she did not care. She had eyes only for Harry, for the scar on his forehead, for the thing she had felt tear loose 12 years ago. The Master's piece, look at you. They've made you strong, good, the Master will be pleased, a strong reliquary. She laughed, delighted, mad, reaching toward him almost tenderly. Come home, little vessel. Come home to where the Master's piece belongs. I'll keep you safe until he rises. I'll keep you so safe. I'm not a piece of him, Harry said, and his voice cut through the battle cold and clear, a voice he'd learned from the man who'd raised him. I'm the cage he's trapped in. And you just walked into a house full of people who love what's in the cage and want nothing of what you came for. He hit her with everything. It was not enough. She was Bellatrix Lestrange, 12 years of devotion sharpened to a blade, and she turned his appalling power on a shield that buckled and held. And she came back at him with the cruelty of the truly faithful, and for one terrible moment the strongest young wizard in Britain met the most dangerous witch of her generation and was, by the cold arithmetic, overmatched, because power is not the same as experience, and she had killed more people than he had ever met. The curse that would have taken him green, certain, the door with nothing behind it, was already in the air when Regulus Black stepped into its path. He had crossed the battle the instant he saw her wand turn on his son, the way he had crossed a kitchen to take his children's hands, the way he had crossed a churchyard's worth of dread to make a bargain he hated, and he put himself between the curse and the boy because that was the one arithmetic he had never needed to think about. The green light took him in the chest, over the cold mark, and Regulus Black fell. He did not die. That was the thing the curse could not quite manage, though it should have, though by every law it should have, and only later, piecing it together, would Hermione understand that the cold dead place the locket had left over his heart, the patch of flesh that belonged to the lake, had taken the curse the way scar tissue takes a blade, dulled it, refused it full purchase. The killing curse struck a man who was already, in one small region of himself, dead, and the deadness confused it. He fell with his heart stuttering and his chest a ruin of cold and worse than cold, and he did not die, but he was going, and the whole battle stopped in the space of his falling. What happened next, the surviving Death Eaters would never be able to describe coherently, and Bellatrix would carry into her own eventual grave as the night she lost her faith's certainty. Harry Black watched the man who had pulled him out of a cupboard fall with a curse meant for his son, and the power that Regulus had spent 12 years teaching him to control came all the way off the leash, not the overflow, not the flood, but something underneath it, the thing the house had recognized in the storm, the thing 900 years of black blood had been waiting for an heir worthy of. The hollow answered him completely. Every ward, every star in the cold ceiling, every thread of the family's ancient magic turned to the grief-mad boy in its heart and gave him everything. And Harry Black became, for 90 seconds, something closer to the house itself than to a child, and the Death Eaters who had come to steal a relic were swept out of the valley like leaves before a flood, broken and scattered and running, and Bellatrix Lestrange, for the first time since she was a girl, chose to flee rather than die. And then Albus Dumbledore arrived in fire and phoenix song, exactly too late to fight and exactly in time to see the boy he'd planned to spend standing over the man he'd never believed could love anyone, the whole valley scoured clean of the enemy by a 13-year-old's grief, the wards of an ancient house blazing in recognition of an heir who had given them everything and taken everything back. He saw it and he understood, finally and completely, what Regulus had built and why, and the understanding rearranged something in the old man that had been fixed in place for a very long time. "Help him," Hermione said. She was on her knees beside Regulus with her hands pressed to the cold ruin of his chest, and she was not crying because crying was for after, and she looked up at the most powerful wizard in Britain with the full cold authority of the House of Black. "You came for the war. The war's standing right there." She did not look at Harry, blazing and emptying and beginning to shake, "and it's going to need this man alive, and so am I, and so is he. You're the greatest wizard of the age. Prove it. Help him." Albus Dumbledore knelt in the scoured valley beside the man who had outthought him, and bent his ancient and considerable power to the work of keeping Regulus Black in the world, and as he worked he understood that the bargain made in the churchyard had just been paid in full and in advance, and that he was no longer entirely sure he wanted the ending he'd spent 12 years planning. The Order of the Phoenix arrived in the scoured valley in 2s and 3s, summoned by their leader's Phoenix, and they came expecting a battlefield and found instead a finished one, and standing in the middle of it, impossibly, a man most of them had buried 13 years ago. Regulus was down then, bleeding out the curse that should have killed him, and the work of the next hour was healing and not explaining. But there were members of that order old enough to remember the war that had taken half their friends, and more than one of them looked at the gaunt, dark-haired man Dumbledore knelt over and went white, because the face was the face of a Death Eater who had died in 79, and the dead do not bleed. Dumbledore gave them between one healing charm and the next, the only explanation he had time for and the only one that mattered. He destroyed more of the enemy than all of us combined, and he has been doing it alone for 13 years, and you will help me keep him alive or you will get out of my light. It was not a full account. It would take weeks for the full account to settle through the order, and longer for some of them to forgive a man who had worn the mark, and some of them never quite would. But the Phoenix had carried his note, and the valley was scoured clean of Bellatrix's cell by a 13-year-old's grief, and there are arguments that a battlefield wins before they are ever spoken. Kreacher would not leave his master's side, and no one made him, because the old elf's magic was doing something to the curse wound that even Dumbledore did not fully understand, some ancient bond magic between a house elf and the blood of his house, pouring the elf's own strength into the man who had pulled him out of a cave 13 years ago by refusing to let him be a casualty. Kreacher keeps master, the elf said over and over, his cracked hands pressed beside Dumbledore's to the cold ruin of Regulus's chest. Kreacher kept master once before. Kreacher does not stop. The man who gave the order said do not stop, and Kreacher did not stop, and master lived, and Kreacher will not stop now. And he did not all that long night, and afterward the healers would say that the curse should have finished its work in minutes, and that something had held it off for hours, and Dumbledore would think privately that he had seen a great deal of powerful magic in his long life, and very little of it as purely fierce as one old servant's refusal. Bellatrix fled north and did not stop. She had come for the master's relic, and she had watched the relic become a flood that swept her faithful out of a valley like leaves, and somewhere in her flight the certainty that had sustained her through 12 years in a cell cracked, not broke, never broke, but cracked, a hairline fault in the devotion, the first doubt she had permitted herself since she was a girl. She had felt the master's work in the boy. She had been right about that. But she had also felt the boy turn the master's own peace into nothing, felt him stand over the falling traitor and refuse the title of vessel, and the thing she carried north into the dark was not the triumph she'd promised her cell, but a question she could not afford to ask. What if the master's relic does not want to be recovered? What if the master's relic has a house and a family and a will of its own, and we have not been hunting a piece of our Lord at all, but a boy who happens to be his cage? She buried the question the way the faithful bury all dangerous questions, under devotion and rage, and she ran for the misplaced master she still believed would rise, but the question went north with her, and it did not leave. And Albus Dumbledore knelt in the scoured valley through the whole of that night with his hands and a house elf's beside the wound of a man he had spent 12 years trying to find, and he had a great deal of time to think while he worked, and what he thought was this: that he had built his whole strategy for the war on the assumption that there was no one else who understood it, no one to share the terrible knowledge, no one to carry the unbearable plan but himself. And he had been wrong for 13 years. There had been a second man carrying it the whole time, in a hidden house in Wales, fighting the same war from the opposite end, Dumbledore preparing the boy to die for the world, Regulus learning how to keep the boy from having to. Two men alone, neither knowing the other existed, each certain he bore the weight by himself. We could have done this together, Albus murmured, too quietly for anyone but the unconscious man to not hear. 13 years, we could have carried it between us. And he understood, kneeling there, that the loneliest part of his long life had been a choice, and not a necessity, and that the dead man he was fighting to keep alive had made the opposite choice, had refused at every turn to carry anything alone, and had built out of that refusal the one thing Albus Dumbledore had never managed to build in all his power and all his years, which was a family that would not let each other fall. Regulus did not wake for 3 days, and when he did, the first thing he saw was his 2 children asleep in chairs on either side of the bed, holding each other's hands across the gap, and the second thing he saw was the dawn, and he decided the dawn could wait and looked at the children a while longer. He was not whole. He would never again be whole. The curse had taken something the locket had started, and he would walk slower and tire faster for the rest of his life, and the cold place on his chest had spread. But he was alive, which the curse should have prevented, and his children were alive, which was the only sum that had ever mattered. They woke when he stirred, both at once, the way they did everything. You stepped in front of it, Harry said. He had aged years in 3 days. The grief and the power and the near loss had burned the last of the boy off him. You weren't supposed to. We had it. I had it. You didn't have to. You didn't have it. She'd have killed you. Regulus's voice was a wreck, but it was his. And I've stepped in front of worse for you than a curse, Harry. I stepped in front of a whole life I'd planned the night I pulled you out of a cupboard. A curse was easy by comparison. He turned his head, slow, costly. What you did after. The house, I felt it from inside the dying. You gave the hollow everything, and it gave you everything back, and you scoured a valley with your grief, and then... He fixed the boy with the cold, clear eye that had never once lied to him, and then you stopped. You took it back. You didn't let the power keep you. A lesser man would have burned for a week and not noticed the difference between his enemies and his sister. You stopped. That's the whole of what I built you for, not the power, the stopping. He looked then at Hermione, who had not let go of her brother's hand in 3 days and had no intention of starting now, and who had directed his rescue with the cold authority of a lady of the house, and who had, the healers told him, not slept. You held the line while I was down, he said. Both of you, you held the house, which means the house doesn't need me the way it did, which is exactly what I raised you for and exactly what no parent is ever ready for. His eyes closed briefly and opened them. There's something you should both know now while it's quiet, because the war isn't over. Bellatrix ran, but she's alive, and the Dark Lord is still misplaced and still has pieces in the world, and there's still a piece in you, Harry, that we have not yet learned to cut loose. The work isn't done, but tonight it's quiet and I'm alive and you held the house. His ruined voice gentled, which it almost never did. Tauger's purr, you kept the faith, both of you. Always faithful, and he stopped because the cave had taught him a great many things and softness was not one of them, and he had to reach for it. I'm proud of you there, I've said it, don't make me say it twice, the curse already nearly killed me. That night on the roof of the hollow, with Regulus mending below and the valley scoured and quiet under the cold real stars, Harry and Hermione finally said the thing they had spent their whole lives not saying, and they said it the way they did everything, which was together and without flinching. I thought he was going to die, Hermione said, and then I thought you were going to die when the power took you before you stopped. And in the same hour I almost lost both of you, and I understood something I've been refusing to understand since we were 10 lying on the training ground. She turned to him on the cold slates. I don't want to be your sister, Harry, I never really was. Regulus made us twins of the house because it was strategy and because it was true and because it kept us safe, but it was never the whole truth, and we've both known it for years, and I'm done not saying it. I almost lost you tonight. I'm not going to spend whatever time we get pretending. I know, Harry said. He had known on the roof of the London house watching her be afraid for him. He had known on a training ground when he was 10 and chose not to look at her. He had known probably since she handed him a wooden snake when he was 2. I vouch for you to the oldest magic in my family because you're mine, and I let everyone think I meant it the way a brother means it, and I never once meant it that way. He took her hand, the one that had pressed itself to Regulus's dying chest, the one that had held his across the gap between 2 chairs for 3 days. We do everything together, we always have. I'd just like to start doing this part on purpose. They did not say more than that. They were Regulus's children, raised in restraint, taught that the truest things are stated once and then lived. And so they stated it once on a roof under the cold stars, and then they sat shoulder to shoulder the way they had 1,000 times before, except that now it was on purpose, now it was chosen, now it was the beginning of the thing rather than the careful avoidance of it. Below them, a wounded man slept in a house his children had held. Out in the dark, a mad witch ran north to a misplaced master who would, one day, wake. And the war that the whole country still believed was overturned all the way over and opened its eyes, but not tonight. Tonight the hollow stood, and the heirs held it, and for the first time in 12 years, the House of Black was not a thing being defended, but a thing that had won. Chapter 6 and Chapter 7, Twin Heirs Ascendant. By the time Harry and Hermione were 17, there was one piece of the Dark Lord's soul left in the world that anyone could reach, and it was behind Harry's scar, and they had spent 3 years learning exactly how to take it out without taking the boy with it. The years had been a war fought in the dark, the way Regulus had always fought it. The uneasy alliance forged in the Scoured Valley had held not friendship, never friendship, but a working arrangement between a recovering dead man who knew the shape of the enemy's soul and an old wizard who had the order to act on the knowledge. Regulus had given Dumbledore the map. Together over 3 years they had hunted the pieces, a cup drawn out of a deep Gringotts vault by a goblin who respected clients that restored what was thrown away. A diadem found in a castle's forgotten room by a Hermione who could not be kept out of any library, including the one inside a school she had finally, on her own negotiated terms, consented to visit. A ring in a ruined shack that Dumbledore had nearly died reaching and would have, had Regulus not taught him what the cursed thing would do. One by one the anchors had fallen. The Dark Lord, misplaced and waiting, had grown thinner in the world with each, and somewhere out in the dark he had begun, the signs said, to stir toward a body, but he was weaker now than he had been in 20 years, and he did not yet know that the people unmaking him were 2 teenagers and a man he believed dead. And through all of it, in the deep cold room beneath the hollow, Hermione Black had been building the thing no one had ever built, because no one had ever wanted to badly enough. It's a question of consent, she said, the night before they did it, with the theory spread across the ritual room in her relentless hand, and Regulus listening from the chair he now needed, and Harry sitting very still in the center of it all. Every Horcrux we destroyed by force, basilisk venom, fiendfire, the curse in the ring. We broke the vessel to kill the fragment. We can't do that to Harry, he is the vessel, so we don't break the vessel, we convince it to evict the tenant. She touched the diagram. The fragment is anchored to Harry because the night it lodged, his magic was too young to refuse it, it just moved in, the way it moved into the locket, into the diary. But Harry isn't a locket. He's a living wizard of the House of Black, recognized by the family magic, bound to a house whose deepest right is about who belongs and who doesn't. We don't cut the fragment out. We used the heirs right, the same magic that tested me and said yes, and we asked the house to look at Harry the way it looked at me, all the way down, and to name what's truly of him and what's a trespasser. And then we let the house do to the fragment what it does to anything that isn't kin. She looked up, and for once her certainty was a fragile thing. The house evicts the trespasser. Harry stays because Harry belongs, that's the theory. It's never been done, and I'm as sure of it as I've ever been of anything, which isn't the same as being sure. It's the right shape, Regulus said quietly. He had checked her work the way he checked everything, and found, as he increasingly did, that there was nothing to add. It's the thing I was circling for 12 years and never reached, because I was thinking like a man who destroys Horcruxes, and you thought like a woman who was once told she didn't belong and made the magic say otherwise. You know better than any of us how to convince a house to keep what's truly its own and throw out what isn't. He turned to his son. But it's your body and your soul and your risk, and I will not have it done to you. You have to choose it, freely. The way I made you both choose the night you became heirs. This is the same door. There's no undoing it, and it might not work, and I won't pretend the cost of it failing is small. His ruined voice did not waver. Harry, do you want us to try? Harry looked at the two of them, the man who had spent 12 years learning how to save him, the girl who had spent 3 years finishing the work. The family the world had told him a dozen times he was too dangerous to be allowed to keep, and he thought about a cupboard, and a doorstep, and a wooden snake handed across a gap. I've had a piece of the worst thing in the world living behind my face my whole life, he said. I've been a relic to Bellatrix and a weapon to Dumbledore and a tragedy to everyone who ever heard the prophecy. I want to be just a man for once, just yours, just hers, nothing of his. He held out his hand to Hermione the way he had in the dark of the right when he'd vouched for her. Get it out of me. I trust your theory more than I've ever trusted anything. Let's open the cage. They did it at the heart of the hollow in the deep cold room, with the constellations turning overhead and the black signet on the rim of the basin, and all three of them bleeding into the old grammar of belonging. It was the most dangerous magic any of them had ever attempted, and the chroniclers who would one day try to tell it always reached, at this point, for the cosmic and the vast, because there was no other register large enough. The room did not merely wake, it opened the way it had opened the night it tested Hermione, the candles guttering out and the dark coming down absolute. But this time the dark was full of the house, 900 years of it, the cold bright dead wheeling clothes, Regulus the lion's heart and Sirius the dog star, and every black who had ever been counted leaning in to look at the boy in the basin's light and answer the question the right was asking. Is he ours? Is he truly ours? And what is this other thing wearing the inside of him like a coat? Harry knelt in the dark with the ring under his bleeding hand and Hermione's hand over his and Regulus's voice speaking the old lineage, and he felt the house look at him, felt it go all the way down, past the power and the loyalty and the cupboard-deep fear of being put back outside, down to the bedrock truth of him, and he felt it find, lodged in him like a splinter in a tree the tree had grown around, the thing that was not him. The fragment, it woke as the house touched it, it knew what was coming. It screamed in a voice that was Tom Riddle's and the lockets and the diaries all at once, and it clawed for purchase, and it told Harry the thing it had been whispering behind his scar his whole life, the thing that was almost true and therefore unbearable. You'll be nothing without me. The power was mine, the strength was mine. Cut me out and you'll be the boy in the cupboard again, small and cold and wanting nobody's, no one's. No, said Harry Black into the dark with his family's hands on his and his family's dead-leaning clothes. The power was always mine, the cupboard was never the truth of me. I have a house that woke to my hand and a man who died once to keep me and a girl who built 3 years of magic to set me free, and I have never for one day been nobody's. You're the one who's nobody. You're a splinter in a tree that grew around you and you mistook the tree for yourself. I'm of the house of Black, you're not, and this house throws out what isn't kin. And the house asked the question and given the answer by its own true son, with the blood of the heir and the blood of the chosen and the blood of the keeper all speaking the old grammar of mine, the house evicted the trespasser. It did not break the vessel. It did exactly what Hermione's relentless theory had promised. It named what belonged and cast out what didn't, and the fragment was torn loose the way the family had torn names off a tapestry for 900 years, except that this time the burning off was right, this time it was justice. The splinter came out of the tree. A column of black radiance tore up through the ceiling of the ritual room, the same light that had poured out of the locket and the diary, the death scream of a piece of soul, but this time it poured out of a boy, and the boy did not die because the boy belonged and the thing leaving him did not. The scar on Harry's forehead, warm his whole life, went cold and then went quiet and then went simply still, an old mark on healthy skin, nothing more. The light died, the candles came back. Harry Black knelt in the basin's glow, shaking and whole and entirely, for the first time in his life only himself and Hermione caught him as he sagged, and Regulus, who could no longer kneel, gripped the arm of his chair and said in a voice that the cave had never managed to make cold enough to hide what was in it now, "It worked, Hermione, it worked. You did the thing no one in the history of magic has ever done. You took a piece of the Dark Lord out of a living boy, and the boy is still here." The boy is still here, Hermione repeated, her face against Harry's hair, and she was crying now because the after had finally come and crying was allowed in the after. You're just you, there's nothing of him left in you, you're just you and your hours and you're going to be all right. For 3 days after the extraction Harry slept, and when he woke he was a stranger to himself in the simplest and most extraordinary way. He was quiet inside. He had never known, until it was gone, how much noise the fragment had made. It had been a pressure he'd mistaken for his own ambition, a heat he'd mistaken for his own temper, a whisper so constant he'd taken it for the baseline hum of being alive. Now there was nothing behind his scar but the ordinary weather of his own mind, and he sat at the kitchen table of the Hollow turning a cup of tea in his hands and marveling at the silence like a man who has lived his whole life beside a waterfall and only learned what silence was the day it stopped. It's strange, he told Hermione. She had not left his side in 3 days. She had a healer's chart and a book she wasn't reading and the particular stillness she only had when she'd been frightened and would not say so. I keep waiting for it to say something, the thing in my head. It always had an opinion, and there's just me. I didn't know how much of what I thought was him until he was gone. He looked up. What if some of what I am was him? What if I'm less now? Less powerful, less. You scoured a valley with your grief when you were 13, and that was before any of this, and the fragment had nothing to do with it. I checked it 100 ways. Hermione set the unread book down. The power was always yours, Harry. The house confirmed it. The cup the fragment was whispering you'd lose, there was nothing in that cup. He told you you'd be the boy in the cupboard again because that was the one lie that could still hurt you, and it was a lie. You're exactly as much as you ever were, you're just finally only yourself. She held his eyes. I would know. I've been inside your head since we were 12. I'd know if there was less of you. There isn't. There's just less of him, which is to say none of him, which is to say you're free. Regulus came in slow on his cane, and he looked at the boy for a long moment, and then he did the thing he had taught himself to do only in the last 3 years, which was say the soft thing out loud instead of leaving it to be inferred. I spent 12 years afraid I'd have to choose one day between you and the world. Dumbledore made that choice in his head the night your parents died, and he made it the cold way, and he was wrong, and I knew he was wrong, and I had no proof but a hole in my chest and a refusal. He set a hand on Harry's shoulder. Your sister gave me the proof. There was a third answer all along, not your death, not the world's, but the patience to find the door instead of breaking the wall. You're alive, there's nothing of him in you. That's the answer I'd have died to reach, and I didn't have to because she reached it first. The news of the extraction reached Albus Dumbledore the same week, and the old man received it the way a condemned man receives a pardon he had stopped believing in, with a relief so total it briefly unmade his composure. He came to the Hollow himself, which he had never done. He had always met Regulus on neutral ground, in churchyards and order rooms, the two of them circling. Came this time as a guest, and he sat in the warm kitchen of the house he had spent years failing to find, and he looked at the boy he had planned for 12 patient sorrowful years to send to his death. I made my peace with it long ago, he said quietly. Or I told myself I had, that the boy would have to die for the world to live, and that the kindest thing I could do was prepare him to walk to it bravely when the hour came. I carried that alone because I could not bear to make anyone else carry it. And I was wrong. He looked at Regulus, and there was no benevolence in it now, only an old man's hard honesty. You were right, in the churchyard. I wanted a weapon that thought it was a volunteer, because a weapon I'd loved and raised myself I might not have been able to spend. So I left him cold and unloved, and you took him out of the cold, and you loved him, and you taught him, and you found the third answer I never let myself look for, because looking for it would have meant admitting the cold answer was a choice and not a necessity. He inclined his silver head to the boy, to the girl, to the dead man. I have been the cleverest wizard in Britain for a very long time, and I was outthought on the thing that mattered most by a man who refused to stop loving a child long enough to do the arithmetic the way I did. I am not too proud to say it. I am only sorry it took me 12 years to be glad of it. The war's not over, Regulus said, because someone had to, and gentleness had never been his job. He's still out there, thinner than he's been in 2 decades, almost nothing left to anchor him but out there. He'll reach for a body, and when he does, the last fight comes, and it'll come to all of us. He met the old man's eyes, but it comes now to a world with the boy alive and free and no longer carrying a piece of the enemy in his skull. You spent 12 years planning to win the war by losing the boy. We're going to win it with him standing. That's a better war, Albus. It's the one I've been fighting since I pulled him out of a cupboard. You're welcome to join it on those terms and only those. On those terms, Albus Dumbledore agreed, and gladly, and the alliance that had begun as cold arithmetic in a scoured valley became, in the warm kitchen of the Hollow, something a little closer to trust, not because the two men had come to like each other, which they never quite would, but because they had finally come to want the same ending, which between players of their kind was rarer and worth more than friendship. Freeing Sirius Black was, by comparison, an exercise in patience, which Regulus had learned at last to have. They had known the truth for years. Regulus had deduced it the same winter Hermione found Section 11, that his brother could not have been the Potter's betrayer, that the math of the loyalty never added up, and they had spent the 3 years of the Horcrux War quietly assembling the proof, because a house with 2 confirmed heirs, the respect of the goblins, and a frozen Wisengamot seat had leverage that a dead man hiding in Wales never had. The rat was the key. Hermione found him in the end the way she found everything, in a record everyone else had read past, a family's pet, a rat that had lived 13 impossible years, a missing finger. Once they knew where to look, the Order did the rest, and Peter Pettigrew was dragged squealing into the light, and the case the world had never bothered to try fell apart in an afternoon. Sirius Black walked out of Azkaban gaunt and gray and 12 years older than his years, and the first thing he saw in the free world was a man he had buried in 1979, standing at the prison gates leaning on a cane, with 2 tall teenagers at his shoulders. The brothers looked at each other across the cold stone for a long moment, and neither of them was good at this. They were blacks, and the house had taught them both that softness was a thing you punished, and they had each spent 12 years believing the other lost. "You let me think you were dead," Sirius said. His voice was a ruin from 12 years of disuse. "You little I grieved you, in that cell. You were the one good thing I had left to grieve, and you were alive. I let everyone think I was dead, including you, because including you was the only way it worked, and I'm sorry, and I'd do it again." Regulus did not flinch from it. "I had a child to raise, Sirius, too, in the end, James's son. I pulled him out of a cupboard Dumbledore left him in, and I raised him as a black, and I taught him the thing the family got wrong," and his voice caught, which it almost never did, "and you'd have done the same. You'd have done it louder and worse and gotten yourself killed in the first year, but you'd have done it. I just did it the cold way, the way I do everything." Sirius looked then at the 2 teenagers. At Harry James's face and Lily's eyes, and a stillness that was pure Regulus, the boy he'd never got to raise, raised right by the brother he'd buried. And something in Sirius Black that 12 years of Dementors had not managed to break finally did, and he crossed the cold stone and pulled his brother into an embrace that the cane and the ruined chest made awkward, and that neither of them ended for a long time. "The lordship's yours," Sirius said later, in the warm kitchen of the Hollow, with Creature weeping happily into a feast, and the truth of 12 years laid out between the brothers at last. "Legally. While I live, the ring answers me, but I spent 12 years in a cell, and I don't want to spend the rest of my life voting seats and managing vaults. I want to be an uncle to these 2 and a thorn in the ministry's side, and free, mostly free." He looked at Harry and Hermione. "So I'll hold the lordship as a figurehead and name them my heirs in truth, both of them, the boy and the girl, the gold blessed, and when they're of age the house passes to them. Co-heirs, twin lords of black, or whatever the lawyers want to call it. The first time in 900 years the house will be held by 2 as equals." He raised his glass, and his ruined grin was, for a moment, the boy who had walked out of Grimmauld Place with a trunk and a sneer. Towger's purr, whatever Mother thought it meant. "I think it means us now, the ones who stayed faithful to something worth it." "It does," said Regulus. "It always did. We just had to bury the rest of the family to find out." Sirius Black took a while to learn how to be free, and Harry took a while to learn how to have a godfather, and they learned the 2 things together over a strange, healing summer at the Hollow. It was awkward at first in ways none of them had expected. Sirius had loved James Potter like a brother and had spent 12 years in a cell grieving the baby he'd failed to protect, and the boy who walked the Hollow's halls had James's face and Lily's eyes, and a stillness, a watchful economy, a way of thinking 3 moves ahead before he spoke, that was nothing like James at all, and everything like the cold, careful brother Sirius had buried in 1979. It unsettled him. He'd come out of Azkaban expecting, somewhere underneath the grief, to find James's reckless, laughing boy, and instead he'd found Regulus's heir, and the 2 things sat side by side in Harry and would not resolve. "You're not what I pictured," Sirius admitted one evening on the steps of the Hollow, the 2 of them watching the light go off the Welsh hills. "All those years I thought about you, James and Lily's boy. I pictured, I don't know, James, loud, trouble, a boy who'd hex a teacher and grin about it." He glanced sideways. "You're quiet, you think before you do anything, you're more like Regulus," Harry finished. There was no apology in it. "I know, I was raised by him. He's the only father I remember. I had your brother instead of mine, and he was good at it, Sirius. He pulled me out of a cupboard, and he taught me to be careful with a power that could have made me a monster, and he loved me even though he's terrible at saying so. I'm not James's reckless boy. I'm sorry if that's a loss. But I'm not sorry I'm Regulus's." He looked at his godfather steadily. "I can be both, though. James was your brother and Regulus was mine, yours, I mean. We can both have lost the same people and kept different ones. I'd like to know about my father, the real one. Nobody's ever been able to tell me what James Potter was actually like. Regulus only knew him as the older boy he envied. You knew him as a brother. I'd like that, if you can stand telling it." And that cracked something open in Sirius Black that 12 years of Dementors had only frozen, and he told it, all of it, the years he'd never been able to speak of in a cell, James and Lily and the Marauders, the wedding, the day Harry was born, the friendship that had been the whole of his young life before the war ate it. He told it badly and out of order and with long stops where the grief caught him, and Harry listened the way he listened to everything completely, and somewhere in the telling the boy with James's face stopped being a disappointment and became, instead, the last living place where James Potter could be remembered out loud, and Sirius, who had thought he'd come out of prison to an empty world, discovered he'd come out to family. Hermione he simply adored from the first, with the uncomplicated delight of a man recognizing a fellow troublemaker behind a scholar's mask. She's going to run the whole of magical Britain inside a decade, he told Regulus, with relish watching the girl demolish a point of inheritance law over dinner. Lucius Malfoy doesn't know it yet, but he's already lost everything he's ever going to lose, and she did it before she could legally apparate. I love her. Can we keep her? Oh, we already did. Excellent, you're going to be an appalling influence on both of them, Regulus observed. I'm going to be a fun influence, which is a thing this family has historically executed for, and which these two have had precisely none of, being raised by you. Sirius grinned, and for a moment he was the boy who'd walked out of Grimmauld Place with a trunk and a sneer. You did right by them, Reg, better than I'd have done. I'd have gotten us all killed being brave in the first month. You kept them alive 12 years by being a coward in exactly the right ways. It was from Sirius the highest praise there was. Coward in the family's old vicious sense turned inside out, made into a compliment, the way Regulus had turned the whole creed inside out. Towger's purr, the corrected version. I think Mother would have an aneurysm, which is most of why I like it. She had several posthumously when their names appeared on the wall, Regulus said. The portrait screamed for a week. Creature was delighted, so was I, frankly. And the two brothers sat on the steps of the smallest black property while the light went off the hills, 12 years of grief and lies and a fake death settling slowly into the ordinary peace of two men who had each thought the other lost and turned out to be wrong. The Wisengamot endgame took Hermione Black 90 minutes and the better part of a decade of preparation, and Lucius Malfoy never had a chance, which was the only way she'd have agreed to do it. She rose in the carved chamber as the recognized co-heir of a house with a freed and exonerated lord, the respect of the goblins, 3 years of quiet alliance with Albus Dumbledore behind her, and the documented proof that the Black estate's long stewardship had been administered by a trustee whose name, when she finally produced it, made the chamber gasp. Not Lucius, never Lucius, but Dumbledore himself, who stood and acknowledged it freely and ceded the trusteeship to the restored house with a grace that turned what could have been a scandal into a coronation. The proxy Lucius had voted for 12 years was returned to the House of Black. The seat was unfrozen to its lord. And Lucius Malfoy, who had probed the resurrected house for a soft place years ago and found a girl of 12 with a precedent, watched a young woman of 17 take back everything he'd quietly digested and understood that he had lost the long game to a family that had been 3 moves ahead since before he knew there was a board. You'll want to know what we intend to do with the seat, Hermione told the chamber when it was hers. She did not gloat. Regulus had taught her better, and the not gloating was more frightening than any gloat. The House of Black has a creed, Towger's purr. For 3 centuries this family read it to mean blood, and it used that reading to burn its own children off its walls, for marrying wrong, for loving wrong, for thinking wrong. I am a daughter of this house, and I was not born to its blood. The magic took me anyway, because the creed was always misread. She let that land in a chamber that held more than a few old families who had done their own burning. It does not mean always pure, it means always faithful. And the House of Black intends to vote its seat, hold its name, and spend its considerable fortune in faith, to the idea that what makes a family is not whose blood you carry, but who you keep and who keeps you. We are done burning our own. We are going to spend the next 900 years putting the names back. Lucius Malfoy tried one last move, because men like Lucius always had one last move, and it was the move Regulus had taught his children to expect from a cornered animal with a long reach. Not a frontal attack, but a quiet poison, a question whispered into the right ears about whether a house held by 2 as equals, a blood heir and an adopted girl, a co-lordship unknown in 900 years, was truly legitimate, or merely a clever fiction the goblins had been bribed to bless. He whispered it in the wrong ear. Narcissa Malfoy had spent 3 years watching her resurrected house outthink her husband at every turn, and she had spent those same 3 years watching her sister escape a prison and hunt a child and reduce herself in the end to a gaunt fanatic fleeing a valley scoured by a 13-year-old's grief. She had made her choice somewhere in there, quietly, the way she made all her choices, and she made it final the day her husband began to whisper against the only branch of her family worth a damn. She went to the children, to the young Lord and Lady of Black, ascendant in a house that had been hers before it was anyone's asset, and she laid her husband's whispered campaign out before them in full, names and ears and timing, with the cool precision of a woman who had decided which side of her family she belonged to and had never once been sentimental about a decision. He'll say the co-lordship is a fiction, she said. He'll say the adopted heir can't be equal to the blood. He'll say it in the old family's drawing rooms where the law can't reach but reputation can. Her pale eyes moved to Hermione. And you'll answer it the way you answered him in the chamber, which is by being so plainly, completely, unarguably what you are that the whisper dies of embarrassment. But you'll answer it faster if you have a Black of the old blood standing beside you saying it too, so I'm offering. She inclined her head, every inch the great lady, every inch a daughter of the house. I'm a Black by birth, cousin, and the gold blessed you as equal to the blood, and I happen to agree with the gold, which I have not said about a single thing my husband has done in 20 years. Let me stand with you, let me be the old blood that vouches for the new. My sister chose the master, I choose the house. I find the house is the better bet, and I find to my considerable surprise that I'd have chosen it even if it weren't. So when Lucius Malfoy's whisper finally reached the drawing rooms it had been aimed at, it found, waiting for it, not a defensive young family but a phalanx, 2 ascendant heirs, a freed and exonerated lord, a born Black of impeccable blood vouching for them all, and behind them the quiet weight of Albus Dumbledore and the goblins of Gringotts. The whisper did exactly what Hermione had told the chamber a house could do to anything that wasn't kin. It found no purchase, and it withered, and Lucius Malfoy was left holding a poison no one would drink, watching his own wife restore the house he'd spent 12 years digesting. You understand what you've done, Harry said to Narcissa when the campaign was broken. He had grown into the cold, clear voice now, and he used it gently, which was its own kind of power. You've crossed your husband publicly for us, there's no taking that back. I crossed my husband for my house, Narcissa corrected, which I am told by people who have rewritten the family creed is the only loyalty worth a damn. The corner of her mouth moved, the first true smile any of them had seen from her. Towger's purr, cousin, I learned it wrong my whole life, like everyone else of the blood. I find I rather like the corrected version, always faithful. It turns out I always was, I just hadn't found the right thing to be faithful to, until I watched a dead family refuse to stay dead. And that was how the House of Black, in the space of 3 years, went from a tombstone the powerful divided among themselves to a power the powerful courted, not through blood or gold or even the boy's appalling strength, though it had all three, but through the one thing the family had thrown away for 3 centuries and a dead man had carried alone out of a cave. The simple, unbreakable fact of people who kept faith with each other and could not be divided and would not be moved. That evening they went to the great house in London. Grimmauld Place opened at last, its dusk cleared and its mad portrait silenced and its rooms full, for the first time in decades, of the living. They went to the drawing room, all of them, the 2 brothers, one leaning on a cane and one still gaunt from his cell, creature who had served this house through all its grief and had lived to see it restored, and the twin heirs, 17 and ascendant, hand in hand. And they stood in front of the great tapestry, the 900-year web of names, the burned scorches and the closed parentheses and the gold words at its head. Regulus had taught them the rite that put a name back on the wall years ago by candlelight, and he had told them that one day they would walk into this house and use it. Tonight they did. Harry and Hermione bled into the old grammar one more time together, the way they did everything, and they spoke the names the family had burned off in its long cruelty. Sirius Black, whose face Walburga had scorched from the wool the day he ran. The cousin who had married a Muggle-born and been cast out. Every Black the house had thrown away for being better than it was, and one by one in gold the burned faces grew back into the tapestry, restored, recognized, brought home. And at the head of the wall, where the gold words had read Towger's purr for 3 centuries, the threads themselves shifted under the rite, not erased, never erased, but completed, the old creed restored to the thing it had always secretly been, the wool itself at last agreeing with the dead man who had rewritten it in a cave and a drawing room and 12 years of stubborn love. The whole tapestry blazed. 900 years of names burned bright and unburnable, the restored faces and the old ones, and low on the wall where a dead man had once made 2 impossible threads grow, the names of the twin heirs, twined where they met, lit brightest of all. The cold, bright dead of the House of Black looked down from the wall and from the constellations and from 9 centuries of memory at the 2 young people who had reclaimed them, and the house, alive again, awake again, theirs again, knew its heirs and was satisfied. It's not over, Regulus said quietly beside his brother, watching his children stand lit before the restored wall. He's still out there, thinner than he's been in 20 years, with almost nothing left to anchor him but out there, and he'll come back to a body one day, and when he does the last war of my life will start. I know that, they know that. He leaned on his cane. But he'll come back to a world that has a House of Black in it again, 2 lords who can't be divided, a freed man, a dead man who refuses to stay dead, and a girl who took a piece of him out of a living boy and proved it could be done. He spent his whole life making himself impossible to kill. He never once imagined someone would make a family impossible to break. That's the thing he'll never understand, and it's the thing that's going to end him. He almost smiled, always faithful. It turns out that's the one magic he never learned. Later, when the others had gone to their rooms in the warm full house and the tapestry blazed quietly to itself in the dark, Harry and Hermione stood alone in front of the wall, hand in hand, looking at their two names twined in gold where a dead man had made them grow. "We could make it official," Hermione said. She was looking at the two threads the way she always looked at that wall as a girl who had once been erased and was now written in unburnable gold. "There's a right for it. Of course there's a right for it. There's a right for everything in this family. Two heirs, joined by will instead of by the old arranged marriage politics. It would unite the line, settle the co-lordship question the lawyers keep fussing over, make us one house in law as well as in fact." She glanced at him, and the corner of her mouth moved. "I'm told it's also traditional to want to for its own sake, not a strategy. I find I do want to for its own sake. I've wanted to since I was 10 lying on the training ground," Harry said, "and I've known it since you handed me a wooden snake when I was 2, and I've chosen it every single day since the night on the roof. Strategy's got nothing to do with it, and never did." He turned to her in front of the wall their family had restored, the strongest wizard of his age and the cleverest witch of hers, the boy from the cupboard and the girl the world erased, raised together by a dead man into a thing the war had never accounted for. "We do everything together. Let's do this part on purpose too. Marry me, and let's hold this house as equals, and let's spend 900 years putting the names back." "Yes," said Hermione Black, who had once been told by the oldest magic in his family that she belonged, and who had spent the rest of her life proving it true. "On our own terms, both of us, always." And the tapestry blazed, and the cold bright dead looked down, and the House of Black, restored, ascendant, twin-held and unbreakable, kept the only faith that had ever mattered, the one a dead man had carried alone out of a lake of the dead, and taught to 2 children he refused to leave behind. Above them, in the high dark of the drawing room, the gold words at the head of the wall shone out over 900 years of restored names, meaning at last what they had always meant. Tauger's Pur, always faithful. Chapter 7 end.